Chapter 1333. The 7th day of the 9th month, the capital. The secret diplomatic mission of the Dawson dynasty, carrying the formal agreement between the two sides, began their journey back to their homeland. After 5 days of discussion, the delegations from both sides discussed the demarcation line of the Maya dynasty and the specific deployment of the war. They then reported it to the emperors of both sides and finalized it one by one. The next step was to execute the plan. September 10th. The Dawson dynasty used the autumn harvest as an excuse to temporarily halt their attacks against the Maya dynasty. Their armies began to retreat from the front lines in an orderly fashion, as though they were resting and reorganizing. 2 days later, the great Xia mercenaries stationed in the Mayan dynasty retreated from the front line and returned to the military base. The temperature on the Mayan battlefield suddenly dropped. The Maya dynasty had yet to realize the existence of the problem. Seeing that the temperature of the battlefield had dropped, they were happy to take a break. To tell the truth, the amount of pressure the Dawson dynasty had exerted on them during this period of time was quite enormous. The taut bowstring loosened a little. Something unexpected happened on September 18th. Just as the front lines had relaxed, the Dawson dynasty's army, which had just retreated, suddenly made a comeback, and their momentum was even greater than before. The Dawson dynasty once more sent reinforcements to the front lines. When the Maya dynasty received the news, they were shocked. They anxiously ordered the front line to be on guard and contacted the Xia dynasty's mercenaries to ask them to end their rest and go to the front line to participate in the battle. Unexpectedly, the great Xia dynasty's mercenaries rejected the Mayan dynasty's request for battle, citing the fact that their troops had suffered heavy casualties and were in urgent need of rest and reorganization. According to the employment agreement signed by both parties, the Mayan dynasty did not have the power to force the mercenaries. Both parties only had an employment relationship based on money. Therefore, if the mercenaries were not willing to go to war, the Mayan dynasty could do nothing about it. After being rejected, the Mayan dynasty became anxious. Within a day, they sent 3 batches of people to the military base. The conditions they proposed were better and better. Unfortunately, the mercenaries remained unmoved. This delay lasted for another 5 days. During this period of time, because the great Xia mercenaries weren't around, the Mayan army's defensive pressure increased. They suffered heavy losses and lost 3 cities in a row. The Mayan king was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He did not hesitate to personally rush to the military base and request for the great Xia mercenaries to set off immediately and head to the front line to provide support. It was a pity that the Mayan king's reputation was not as high as it seemed. This time, the military base where the mercenaries were located was closed. The Mayan king was given the cold shoulder. Only then did the Mayan king realize that something was amiss. He also smelled danger in the air. But the situation at the front lines was critical, and the Mayan king didn't have much time to think. Without the help of the Grand Xia's mercenaries, the Mayan dynasty's army was beaten into a sorry state by the Dawson dynasty's army. The Mayan king had no choice but to seek help from the organization. The Azure Badge received the request for help from the Mayan king and took it very seriously. On the same day, they sent a delegation to the capital to personally mediate the matter. The Mayan dynasty was not only one of the 4 remaining dynasties of the Azure Emblem faction, but it was also the only existence of the Azure Emblem in the American continent. Its strategic position was very important. The problem was that the great Xia army was currently working together with the Ashoka dynasty to pursue and attack the Gudo dynasty, which was also in the Azure Emblem camp. The honeymoon period between the two sides had ended before it even started. It was still a problem if he could convince Great Xia. What happened next confirmed the worries of Azure Badge's higher-up. The Chamberlain of Great Xia's Chamberlain of Dependencies courteously received the diplomatic group and did not neglect them. The problem was that when it came to specific matters, the officials of the Chamberlain of Dependencies were secretive and did not want to discuss in detail. It was as if they were intentionally stalling for time. The game of diplomacy between the two sides was unlikely to have a result in a short period of time. The problem was that the front line did not wait for anyone. The following plot was very melodramatic, but it was also very fatal. It was enough to push the Mayan dynasty into the abyss. On the 1st of October, the Great Xia mercenaries unilaterally notified the Mayan dynasty to end the employment agreement between the two sides. Under the escort of the Atlantic Fleet, they set off for the Colombian province to be stationed. Although the Mayan king was furious, he could do nothing about it. It could even be said that the Mayan king did not dare to send troops to intercept them. Firstly, the military strength was tight, and secondly, he did not want any unforeseen events to happen at this critical moment. After all, the relationship between the two sides was purely an employer-employee relationship. As for whether they were allies or not, it might really be wishful thinking on the part of the Mayan dynasty. The relationship between the Great Xia and the Mayan dynasty had always been one of employment. The king of the Mayan dynasty was well aware of this. The worst was yet to come. On the 3rd of October, the day after the successful withdrawal of the Great Xia mercenaries, Great Xia brazenly declared war on the Mayan dynasty. The North American general Xue Rengue led 4 legions of the North American army to attack the Mayan dynasty from the Panama region. At the same time, the 3rd formation of the Atlantic Fleet was guarding the coast. The sudden declaration of war by Great Xia was undoubtedly a death sentence for the Mayan dynasty. It was only then that the Mayan king realized that, without him knowing, the two giants of the American continent had already reached a tacit agreement and secretly divided the Mayan dynasty. To be honest, this feeling was really depressing. I am the meat on the chopping block. In such a chaotic world, the weak really could not control their own fate. The brazen Northern American army of Great Xia was like a cold military knife that stabbed the Mayan dynasty in the back, causing the unprepared Mayan dynasty to lose the last chance to resist. With the tacit cooperation between Great Xia and the Dawson army, the Mayan dynasty did not last for too long. On the 12th of October, the army of the Dawson dynasty was the first to conquer Mexico City, announcing that the Mayan dynasty, which once had a place in the world, was officially coming to an end. According to the agreement signed between Great Xia and the Dawson dynasty, both sides would use the foot of the Sierra Madre del Sur in Mexico City as the boundary, and the entire Mayan dynasty would be divided into 2. The Dawson dynasty occupied most of the areas in Mexico City. Relying on the mountains and deserts in Mexico City, it formed a natural barrier against Great Xia. In this way, the Dawson dynasty had a strategic buffer zone in the south. Great Xia occupied a little bit in the south of Mexico City, and the entire Central American continent, specifically including Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. These areas would form the 5th province of the American Protectorate, the Caribbean province, together with the Panama region and the Greater and Lesser Antilles that were previously included in the Columbia province. The Caribbean province was worthy of its name. The entire Caribbean Sea was the internal sea of the province. With this expansion, the American Protectorate was successfully promoted to a superior protectorate and became the 3rd superior protectorate of Great Xia. At the same time, the former governor of Colombia, Zhou Haichen, was transferred to the governor of the Caribbean province, and continued to guard the Panama Canal for the imperial court. With this transfer, Zhou Haichen also shouldered the heavy responsibility of guarding the border. The cooperation between Great Xia and the Dawson dynasty came to an end the moment the Mayan dynasty was divided. Next, the two dynasties would return to the state of confrontation. The Caribbean province was the front line. It could be foreseen that in the future, the two dynasties would surround the Gulf of Mexico, and there was bound to be a battle between them. Xing Gong, the former governor of Ningdu in the Jiangchuan province, replaced Zhou Haichen and was promoted to the position of governor of Colombia. At this point, the layout of Great Xia in the entire American continent came to an end, and the new structure of the American continent was basically established. While Great Xia was busy dividing up the Mayan dynasty, the situation in the Indian region also changed. Chapter 1334. Due to the relative independence of the 8 major battlefields, the war of the Mayan dynasty had little impact on the Indian region. They continued to move forward step by step. In fact, their progress was even faster than the Mayan battlefield. On the 5th of October, before the dust settled on the Mayan battlefield, after a month of fighting, the allied forces of the Xia dynasty and the Ashoka dynasty finally sent the Gudo dynasty to their grave. The Gudo dynasty also became the 4th dynasty to be destroyed in the 9th year of Gaia. It could be seen that as the 10th year of Gaia approached, the war of dynasties around the world was entering the most intense stage of fighting, and the destruction of dynasties ushered in a new peak. The survivors were kings. With the destruction of the Gudo dynasty, only the Ashoka dynasty was left in the Indian region. It had to be said that this was a miracle that belonged to the Ashoka dynasty. As such, the Ashoka dynasty was not only the only surviving NPC dynasty in the world, but it also unified the entire Indian region. It was an unparalleled glory, and it made the lords who fell midway feel ashamed. For example, King Akbar of the Gudo dynasty. Whether it was Akbar or the Mayan king, as the backbone of the Azerbaijan camp, they both made the same choice when the dynasty was destroyed, to move to the Germanic dynasty. They would bring a group of confidants and obtain a new life in the Germanic dynasty. Not only that, according to the information obtained by the Black Snake Guards, in the past year, members of the Azerbaijan scattered all over the world had begun to quickly gather in the Germanic dynasty. Obviously, this was the strategic arrangement of the Azerbaijan. They were prepared to concentrate their strength in one place because they knew very well that with the evolution of the game world, it was better to concentrate on one place than to blossom everywhere. The Germanic dynasty was the chosen base camp of the Azerbaijan. A few days ago, Gaia released a piece of news on the official website, saying that after the immigration fleet arrived on Planet Hope, for safety reasons, they would not send everyone to the surface of Planet Hope. Before the Vanguard forces establish a stable base on Planet Hope, the fleet staying in outer space is a safer choice, Gaia explained. In this regard, players around the world gave their support. Although everyone was eager to return to reality, it did not mean that everyone would take their own lives as a joke. The dangerous environment of Planet Hope was really daunting. After all, Planet Hope was not a game world. If you died, you would really die. There was no chance of rebirth. Therefore, in today's highly prosperous game world, there was actually nothing wrong with staying in the fleet. If it wasn't for the fact that the resources stored by the fleet were not enough to sustain the fleet's existence in outer space, some people would even be willing to live in the game world for the rest of their lives. At least in the game world, there was no true death. One of the missions of the Forward Operating Base was to obtain resources from Planet Hope to feed the immigration fleet in space. The immigration fleet, on the other hand, served as the main population base, providing a steady stream of talents for the base. At the same time, the raw resources of the Forward Operating Base were also provided by the fleet. This formed a virtuous cycle that complemented each other. As the interstellar fleet's resource reserves were very limited, Gaia announced the first batch of forward operating bases after careful calculations. There were only a pitiful 3. The selection criteria were simple. The Emperor dynasty would be first in line. If there weren't enough spots for the Emperor dynasty, then the strongest dynasty would be selected. The lowest standard was a dynasty. Those below the dynasty would not be considered even if they did not have enough slots. In the entire world, only the Grand Xia and the Dawson clan were empires. A third empire had yet to be born. This also meant that the remaining 9 empires would have to fight for the final spot until their heads bleed. No dynasty would not fight for it. Even an idiot knew the weight of a forward operating base. In other words, this forward operating base was the prototype of a future country on planet Hope. Whoever controlled the forward operating base would obtain the highest authority on planet Hope. Just this point alone was enough to explain everything. There was no need to talk about any specific benefit. Among the various competitors, the Dark Knight Empire, the Germanic dynasty, the Romanov dynasty, and the Persian Empire were the most competitive. As for which one was stronger, it was still unclear. Because of this, the azure emblem was betting on the Germanic dynasty. It could be imagined that if the azure emblem failed to seize the third spot, then it would be difficult for the azure emblem to achieve anything great on planet Hope in the future. Because of this, the azure emblem's resistance in the Mayan battlefield and the Tianzhu battlefield could not be considered fierce. Similarly, if this spot fell into the hands of the Romanov dynasty or the Persian Empire, then the Silver Hand camp would obtain 2 spots and establish their position as the overlord of planet Hope. This was something that even Ouyang Shuo did not want to see. In contrast, although the Dark Knight Empire was powerful, it was weak in overseas expeditions and lacked strategic space. Even when it would be promoted to a dynasty was a problem, so it was the least competitive one. It was believed that this problem had long been placed on the highest agenda of the Dark Knight Empire. According to the information revealed by Gaia, the first batch of 3 subbases would form a 1 main 3 combination with the main base established by the advance fleet. It would become the bridgehead for humans to land on planet Hope. Needless to say, the main base would naturally be personally controlled by Gaia. It was also the hub and brain for humans to land on planet Hope. Gaia also timely announced the construction status of the main base. After 5 years of construction, the outpost base established by the advance fleet had gradually developed from a small camp to a giant city, radiating thousands of miles. The city itself had achieved self-sufficiency. The tall city wall, the sky full of AWACS, and the pitch-black cannon muzzles on the city wall gave people a sense of security. Of course, a detail that could not be ignored was the mottled blood stains on the city wall and the piles of bones at the foot of the city wall. These were all left behind by the monsters that attacked the city. It was a sobering reminder to all humans of how dangerous planet Hope was. On the 6th of October, India. With the destruction of the Godo dynasty, the army of the Ashoka dynasty began to retreat from the Godo dynasty's territory in an orderly manner according to the agreement between the 2 parties, giving up the land to Great Xia. The cooperation agreement between the 2 parties was thus completed. From then on, no one could tell whether the 2 dynasties would continue to cooperate and rule India together, or whether they would start a new round of overt or covert struggle over the right to speak in India. At least Ashoka was still uncertain and even confused. Fortunately, this confusion did not last for too long. Great Xia soon gave an answer. On the 8th of October, before the army of the Ashoka dynasty had completely retreated from the territory of the Godo dynasty, the Great Xia Northern Army brazenly came out under the command of Li Jing and declared war on the Ashoka dynasty. India, which had just calmed down, reignited the flames of war. Chapter 1335. Great Xia's sudden declaration of war left Ashoka completely dumbfounded. King Ashoka had speculated many ways to deal with Great Xia in the future, but he had never expected Great Xia to be so ruthless. They had just ended their cooperation, but they were already waving their butcher's knife at the Ashoka dynasty. Turning hostile like flipping a book. The Great Xia Northern Army consisted of 14 field legions and 700,000 elite troops. They were divided into 3 groups and brazenly charged into the hinterland of the Ashoka dynasty from the frontier fortress of the Shikong province. 2 years ago, when the Ashoka dynasty attacked Tubo, they took the same path. At the same time, the Great Xia Southern Army and the Western Army, which had already met up in the Godo dynasty, quickly headed north. They chased after the army of the Ashoka dynasty and brazenly launched an attack on their former allies. The vast Gudwa Empire was the logistics base of the Great Xia army, and they had nothing to fear. It had to be said that the timing that Great Xia chose to start the war was too coincidental. At this time, half of the forces of the Ashoka dynasty were stationed in the territory of the Peacock dynasty, responsible for guarding the prisoners of war and wiping out the remaining bandits. 40% of the forces were still in the territory of the Gudo dynasty. Only 10% of the troops were left in the mainland, which was less than 150,000. Most of them were concentrated in the capital city of Delhi. Such a military force would not be able to fight back against the Great Xia's northern route army, which had been resting and accumulating strength and had been eyeing them covetously. Under Li Jing's superb command, the Great Xia dynasty's northern route army attacked from three sides. They were like a torrential flood that swept away all resistance. Wherever they went, the cities surrendered. The northern army did not give the enemy any chance. This was the Tang Empire's god of war, Li Jing. If he didn't make any mistakes, he was simply the enemy's nightmare. According to the plan, the three armies of the North Army would meet in Delhi and take down the most important city in the Indian district. Then, with Delhi as the base, they would sweep through the entire Ganges plain. This was the most crucial step. Once the city of Delhi and the surrounding Ganges river plains were occupied by the Great Xia, even if the Ashoka dynasty had the territory of the Peacock dynasty as a strategic rear, it would be difficult for them to make any big wave. Therefore, the Battle of Delhi was the key to this battle. At this time, King Ashoka was still comforting the people in the Peacock imperial court. When he heard the news of the war with the Great Xia, he was so angry that he vomited blood and almost fainted. Shameless! Ashoka, who woke up, was drenched in cold sweat. Everything that had happened in the past few months flashed through Ashoka's mind like a movie. Gradually, they formed a clear line that made one's heart tremble. So, from the very beginning, the so-called alliance was a trap? Ashoka's mouth was dry, and his heart was filled with bitterness. The Great Xia's scheme was too vicious. First, they provoked internal strife in the Indian district to consume the strength of India. Then, they pretended to ally with the Ashoka dynasty to eliminate the two major threats, the Peacock dynasty and the Gudo dynasty. In the end, they revealed their true colors and pointed their weapons at the Ashoka dynasty. I should have known. Great Xia is ambitious. How could they be satisfied with a Gupta dynasty? Ashoka hated his own greed and stupidity for falling for Great Xia's trick. It was greed that blinded Ashoka's eyes, causing him to collaborate with Great Xia and set off the Great Indian War. It was also his foolishness that caused King Ashoka to gradually lower his guard against his ally, Great Xia. He kept moving his troops away from his homeland, causing the defenses of his homeland to be weak, giving Great Xia an opportunity to take advantage of. What made Ashoka even more miserable was that, after the last game update, there was only one teleportation circle in the Indian district in Delhi. It was impossible for Ashoka to return to Delhi quickly. The thought of his nest being breached by the enemy at any time made Ashoka anxious. No, I can't give up. Ashoka's eyes were red like a gambler who had lost and was ready to bet everything. In fact, it was not that the Ashoka dynasty had no chance of winning. Firstly, the army of the Ashoka dynasty was still there. There were more than 1,400,000 soldiers, and after more than a year of war, all of them were elite troops. Secondly, as long as the Ashoka dynasty could get through the most difficult time and delay the war, they could turn the prisoners of war of the Peacock dynasty into active forces and enter the battlefield. At the same time, Ashoka could also recruit soldiers on the spot. In short, there were two strategic goals for the Ashoka dynasty at the moment. One was to arrange for the army to travel day and night to reinforce Delhi. The army of the Ashoka dynasty had to enter Delhi before the army of Great Xia to be able to defend the capital. As long as the capital did not fall, the Ashoka dynasty would exist forever. Secondly, they had to fight for time and turn this war into a protracted war to win the opportunity for the dynasty to recruit troops. What was even more amazing was that it was already October, and winter was coming soon. Therefore, from the perspective of the weather, it was more advantageous for the Ashoka dynasty. In addition, the Ashoka dynasty was fighting on their own territory, and they had all the advantages. There was no reason to say that the Ashoka dynasty would not be able to win this war. When the generals were gathered for a meeting, Ashoka spoke passionately. Ashoka's words lit up the hearts of the generals. All of them were in high spirits, and their blood was boiling. They threatened to completely drive Great Xia out of India. "We won't even give them the Gupta dynasty," the generals said. At this military meeting, Ashoka made a decision to send 150,000 elite troops from the Peacock dynasty and the Gupta dynasty to travel day and night to reinforce Delhi. Ashoka was responsible for coordinating the remaining troops and personally leading them to fight the decisive battle with the Great Xia army. "If we lose this war, I can only atone for my sins with death." Before the expedition, Ashoka made a blood oath, which made the generals howl in agitation. "Fight to the end! If we don't win, we won't return." It had to be said that the ruthless Ashoka did not have any cowards under him. They were all heroes who dared to die. October 15th, Bangalore City. After sending off the advance troops, Ashoka prepared to set off with the army. On that day, the massive army of more than 500,000 soldiers held an oath ceremony. Then, they escorted Ashoka out of Bangalore City and set off for the mainland. In the face of Great Xia's provocation, the Ashoka dynasty accepted the challenge. This was the biggest battle in the Indian region. Whoever won would be the master of the Indian region. At the same time, in the capital, the news of Ashoka leading his troops into battle was reported to the capital by the Black Snake Guard. Imperial Palace, Imperial Study. Ouyang Shua hung up the video call with the Black Snake Guards and revealed a complicated smile. "Ashoka, have a safe journey." As he spoke, Ouyang Shua took out a mysterious talisman. It was the Imperial Death Talisman that Gaia rewarded him when he was promoted to a dynasty. After using it, he could designate any NPC emperor to die immediately. Without hesitation, Ouyang Shua picked up the brush and wrote Ashoka's name on the blank space of the talisman. In an instant, the talisman spontaneously combusted and turned into a golden light. With a whoosh, it passed through the barrier of space and entered the body of Ashoka, who was thousands of miles away. Chapter 1336. Ashoka was dead, and he died without a sound. As the only NPC emperor in the world, Ashoka enjoyed unparalleled authority in the Ashoka dynasty. He could decide the life and death of people with a single word. He was the soul of the Ashoka dynasty. Because of this, Ashoka's sudden death was a devastating blow to the Ashoka dynasty. The morale that had just been boosted instantly fell to the freezing point. The troops didn't know if they should launch a counterattack against the invasion of Great Xia according to the predetermined plan or escort the king's body to the capital to select a new successor of the dynasty. On the other side, Great Xia's attack was getting fiercer. At this time, if the Peacock King was still in India, he might be able to rise up and raise the flag of the Peacock dynasty again. However, the moment the Peacock dynasty was destroyed, the Peacock King was listed as a key target by Ashoka and sent to the Reincarnation Temple. The Peacock King had no choice but to join another country. In addition, the King of Mando had long since defected to the Germanic dynasty. At this time, the Indian region could be described as a group of dragons without a leader. In the face of the attack of Great Xia, defeat was only a matter of time. October 18th, Jingshur. After using the Imperial Death Talisman to kill Ashoka, Ouyang Shua didn't pay much attention to the situation in India. Under such circumstances, if the Great Xia army still couldn't occupy the entire territory of India, it would be a real failure. Part of Ouyang Shua's mind was used to deal with the aftermath of the Battle of Maya. After the establishment of the Caribbean province, the American theater of operations adjusted the defense areas of the three major armies to adapt to the new situation. The North American Army, which was previously stationed in the Columbia province, was now stationed in the newly established Caribbean province as the main border defense force against the Dawson dynasty. With the end of the Battle of Maya, the Dawson dynasty entered a short period of dormancy. In order to destroy the Maple Leaf dynasty, the Dawson dynasty spent nearly a year. In order to deal with the Maya dynasty, the Dawson dynasty spent nearly a year. The continuous war for 2 years was also a huge drain on the Dawson dynasty. Whether it was the people or the material resources, they were on the brink of being stirred up and urgently needed to recuperate. In addition, they had to appease the occupied areas. Therefore, although the global situation was changing and it was a great opportunity for heroes to rise up and make achievements, Jack didn't let victory get to his head. He stopped very rationally and focused on managing the internal affairs. Jack knew very well that only by managing North America well could they talk about other things. What's more, Gaia had announced 3 bases, and if there were no surprises, one of them would be the Dawson dynasty. Naturally, Jack was no longer as anxious as before. After all, stability trumps everything else. Of course, recuperating didn't mean that he didn't do anything. Similar to what the Grand Xia had done in the past, the Dawson dynasty didn't forget about its overseas territories while strengthening its internal affairs. The Dawson dynasty's only overseas territory was naturally the Central African region. Previously, Jack had been busy with the Mayan battle and had not had the energy to care about the African continent. Now that the Mayan conflict had been resolved, Jack naturally could not tolerate the Banto dynasty's arrogance. There would probably be a good show in the upcoming war in Africa. Generally speaking, the retreat of the Dawson dynasty was also a great opportunity for the North American Army to establish a line of defense and border fortifications in the Caribbean province. The South American Army was still stationed in the Amazon province, Brasilia province, and Uruguay province. As for the brave Tiger Army, they were transferred from Brasilia province to Columbia province. It had been more than a year since the Brasilia dynasty had submitted. The 3 South American provinces had already stabilized, and the internal conflicts had gradually been eliminated. There were no more major hidden dangers. As such, there was no need for the brave Tiger Army to be a deterrent in Brasilia province. As for the threat of the Indian Empire, it was basically non-existent. Although the Indian Empire was no longer an ally of the Grand Xia, Juarez knew very well that there would not be a good outcome if they went against the Grand Xia. The current stability of South America was the greatest benefit of the Indian Empire. In addition, it was very difficult for the Indian Empire to obtain a spot in the forward operating base of Planet Hope. In the future, Juarez would have to rely on the Grand Xia for the affairs of Planet Hope, so he would not be presumptuous. Of course, he still had to take precautions. Ouyang Shua did not wish for the American protectorate that he had painstakingly established to fail miserably. The transfer of the brave Tiger Army to Columbia province was tantamount to playing the role of a connecting link. They could go north to support the Caribbean province, and they could also go south to support the 3 South American provinces. The situation in the American War Zone was thus settled. Apart from the adjustments to the American War Zone, there was also the handling of the mercenaries. After 2 major battles, the mercenary army that was initially formed had a total of 9 corps. Now there were only 6 corps left, which amounted to a total of 300,000 soldiers. After the tempering of the 2 battles, the surviving mercenaries were already true elites, and their combat strength was not much different from the Grand Xia regular army. In view of the outstanding achievements of the mercenaries in the American War Zone, Ouyang Shua decided to secretly give them the designation of the Spectre Army. Due to the flexible characteristics of the mercenaries, Ouyang Shuo even allowed the Spectre army to have special privileges in the entire army. There was no limit on the number of corps, and they could be adjusted according to the actual situation. This was also a reward for the mercenaries. From now on, they would be secretly registered as the regular army of the empire, and they were essentially no different from other army groups. In order to better control this army group, Ouyang Shuo ordered to secretly promote the former commander of the Royal Forest Guards, Tsing Guoquan, to the position of the commander of the Spectre army. Tsing Guoquan was the 9th younger brother of Tsing Guofan. He graduated from a private school in Xiong village and was one of the main generals of the Xiong army. Because he was good at digging trenches to besiege cities, he was given the title of Iron Bucket Tsing. With Tsing Guoquan around, Ouyang Shuo could truly be at ease with the Spectre army. The commander position left behind by Tsing Guoquan was taken over by the commander of the Royal Forest Guards 5th Corps, Lin Jing. The deputy commander of the 1st Corps, Bright Moon Illuminates the River, was promoted to the commander of the 5th Corps. As such, the internal structure of the Royal Forest Guards was also reshuffled. Lin Jing's invisible promotion was an obvious signal. Ouyang Shuo had to firmly grasp this special army in his hands. As the situation in the American war zone stabilized, it was no longer appropriate to leave the Spectre army in the American protectorate. After a proposal from the Privy Council, the Imperial Court decided to secretly transfer the Spectre army to the African war zone to carry out a secret military operation codenamed Steel Forging. This operation was related to the Empire's layout in Europe, and it was clear how much importance the Imperial Court placed on the Spectre army. The atmosphere in the European battlefield was very strange, and Ouyang Shuo couldn't make up his mind at the moment. Therefore, he ordered the Spectre army to act according to the situation after arriving in Africa. On the 20th of October, Gaia suddenly revealed a piece of news on the official website. It made all the players around the world fall into a dead silence. Even Ouyang Shuo's expression changed drastically. Chapter 1337. Gaia 9th Year, 20th of October. It was a day worth remembering. At 9 in the morning, Gaia suddenly released a video on its official website. The video showed the base that the Advance Fleet had built on Planet Hope, Hope City. The players were no strangers to this city. Not long ago, when Gaia announced the construction plan for Planet Hope, they had also announced the latest construction situation of Hope City. The majestic city was very reassuring. What was shocking was that the city that carried the hope of humanity was now in a sea of fire. Above the city, hundreds of wyverns with wings that covered the sky and large scales were circling around. Their mouths were filled with fangs as they spewed out scorching flames. The flames were so domineering that they turned the steel city into molten iron. It was terrifying. And at the city wall, a row of 10-meter-tall titans wielding hammers the size of cars smashed the seemingly sturdy city wall into pieces. It was unknown what the hammers were made of, but they had such power. Under the hammers, the reinforced concrete city wall was like tofu, unable to withstand a single blow. Even the ground was shaking as cracks the size of bowls appeared. Before this, no one would have imagined that there would be such a domineering way of attacking a city in the world. As the city wall collapsed, the dire beast horde that had been surrounding the city surged into the city like a tidal wave. The number of dire beasts was so great that it was impossible to count them. It formed a sea of dire beasts. Among the dire beasts, the players discovered familiar Tyrannosaurus, pterosaurs, and velociraptors. There were also dire beasts that the players had never seen before. All of them were ferocious and imposing. In the city, humans were like ants as they were ravaged by all sorts of dire beasts. The dire beast tide that filled the sky nearly drowned the entire city. What was even more terrifying was that the humans' laser weapons and even laser cannons were ineffective when they hit the fire dragons or titans. Even the other dire beasts only suffered some flesh wounds under the laser gun's attack. Upon closer inspection, It turned out that the bodies of these top dire beasts were covered with a thin layer of energy. It completely blocked the attacks of the human weapons, preventing them from causing any damage to their bodies. These top dire beasts were the culprits behind the destruction of the city. Without their leadership, the dire beast horde would not have been able to successfully attack the city. Ouyang Shua looked at the image of the City of Hope that was gradually turning into ruins. His face tightened, and he began to wonder why he had not seen such fire dragons or titans in the dire beast atlas that Gaia had revealed. Previously, Gaia had rewarded Ouyang Shua with a Planet of Hope's resource handbook. It contained information on the various beasts on Planet of Hope. It was more complete than the game. Even so, Ouyang Shua found the ferocious beast tide extremely unfamiliar. It was reported that after the Vanguard fleet built their base, they arranged for artificial satellites to conduct a full coverage of Hope Planet with no blind spots. In the following period of time, a large number of drones were sent deep into the wilderness, forests, mountains, deserts, swamps, and other places on Hope Planet to conduct detailed investigations. Dire beasts, dragons. From the dire beasts direbeast. As drones. Try. Dragons of the dragons recorded the drones recorded alive. If necessary, the drones could even send out robots to collect specimens. That was how most of the dire beasts in the game came. Logically, it was impossible for dire beasts like the fire dragons and titans to escape the drone's detection. Ignoring everything else, just the heat emitted from their bodies could be sensed by the drone's heat conduction devices. If not, then the only explanation was that these beasts had extraordinary intelligence. They were either hiding deep in the mountains, in caves, or in swamps to avoid detection. The hammer in the Titan's hand also proved this point. The hammer was obviously forged. This meant that these top dire beasts had mastered the forging method. Perhaps they could no longer be seen as simple beasts. Instead, they were another type of intelligent species. They were on equal footing with humans. After 4 years, these dire beasts emerged from their hiding places and quickly gathered together. Under the leadership of the top dire beasts, they destroyed the invaders in one fell swoop. Such a guess made Ouyang Shua shudder. Without a doubt, be it Gaia or humans, they had greatly underestimated the danger of Planet Hope. It was a planet far more dangerous than the game world. There were too many mysterious creatures living on the planet. Ouyang Shua could no longer determine if the fire dragons and titans were the top dire beasts on Planet Hope. Perhaps there were even more domineering creatures above them. Against these top dire beasts, ordinary laser weapons were useless. Perhaps missiles could cause serious damage to these dire beasts, but they might not be able to kill them. Moreover, missiles were long-range weapons. They were not suitable to deal with the dire beasts that had already entered the city. Above the missile was the nuclear bomb. Unfortunately, Earth had already destroyed all nuclear weapons in the Federation era. Not to mention the Advance Fleet, even the Interstellar Migration Fleet did not carry nuclear bombs. Even if they did, it was not suitable to use them. Planet Hope was humanity's last hope. If they fired a nuclear bomb, it would be equivalent to suicide. They would personally send Planet Hope to its doom. Even Planet Hope could not withstand a few nuclear bombs. Ouyang Shua was even more worried. If they fired a nuclear bomb, not only would the radiation not have any side effects on the dire beasts, it would also stimulate the dire beasts to mutate and increase the danger on Planet Hope. If that was the case, they would really be shooting themselves in the foot. At the end of the video was the City of Hope, which had been completely reduced to ruins. Above the ruins of the city, the dire beasts were roaring at the sky and celebrating wantonly. Their faces seemed to be filled with mockery. The entire Advance Fleet was left with 2 spaceships that were still in Planet Hope's orbit. They floated alone on the orbit, recounting a sense of desolation. Humanity's first expedition to Planet Hope had ended in a crushing defeat. Many players cried after watching the video. They could not accept such a failure. Some even said sorrowfully, Could it be that humanity no longer has a way out? The destruction of the City of Hope seemed to represent the destruction of humanity's hope. Even the City of Hope, which had been built for 4 years, seemed so vulnerable in front of the dire beast. People could not imagine how the 3 subbases that the fleet was about to build could survive on planet Hope. The 3 spots that Gaia had given out had gone from being highly sought after to a hot potato. What should we do? People were shouting, panicking, and asking for help. Gaia gave them a solution. Chapter 1338. After releasing the video of Hope City's destruction, Gaia provided a response plan. According to the star maps sent by the Advance Fleet, there was a resource planet not far from Hope Planet. On the planet there were all kinds of ores, coal, and oil resources. It was an industrial base that humans dreamed of. The problem was that the resource planet had all kinds of resources except for biological resources. The photos showed that the resource planet was a desolate, dead planet with no living creatures. The only water resources were located in the ice layer at the north and south poles. The ice layer was extremely solid. There was no sunlight all year round, so naturally, there were no signs of life. More importantly, because it was a desolate resource planet, the polar ice layer was rich in all kinds of heavy metal elements. It was seriously polluted and could not be drunk at all. At most, it could only be used in factories. Otherwise, life wouldn't have been born. This also meant that the resource planet could not be used as a new human settlement. Gaia's plan was to arrange for the interstellar fleet to temporarily stop at the resource planet. There were 2 main purposes. First, to use the mineral resources of the resource planet to produce combat robots on a large scale to prepare for the second expansion of Hope Planet. Without sufficient strength, it was impossible to establish a foothold on Hope Planet. Second, to develop combat mecha. This was another creative scientific result after Gaia's materialization. Facing those top dire beasts, even the strong adventurers could not face them easily. Gaia's solution was to let the players combine with the mecha and become the top combat power. Of course, the materialized generals could also pilot the mecha. The problem that needed to be solved was that the resources carried by the interstellar fleet could not last for too long, especially the nutrient solution for the players. It was nearing the limit. Without the nutrient solution, the players could not survive in the fleet. Since the resource planet could not obtain biological resources, it was naturally impossible to produce nutrient solution. The only way was to send another advance fleet to land on Hope Planet for the second time. After landing, the nutrient solution would be produced on Hope Planet and sent to the resource planet. The resource planet could continuously send combat robots and combat mecha to the advance base on Hope Planet, increasing the military strength of the base. This would form a virtuous cycle. The ultimate goal was to establish a foothold on Hope Planet. The problem now was, at this moment, who was willing to step forward and lead the second advance fleet to land on that extremely dangerous planet, risking their lives to establish a forward base again? Gaia did not give an answer. No one could give an answer. The mission was dangerous, and they had to maintain a positive interaction with the resource planet. Thus, they had to go there voluntarily. Otherwise, the plan would not be able to be carried out smoothly. The time the interstellar fleet would arrive at the resource-rich planet was estimated to be June of the 10th year of Gaia. That was to say, there were nearly 8 months left for the players of the world to make their choice. Due to the limited resources of the interstellar fleet, they could not afford to fail a second time. Not everyone could go if they wanted to. One of the conditions was that the participant had to be one of the current feudal lords. Only the lords who had survived until now had the experience and courage to explore the wastelands. In this way, the range was greatly reduced. Faced with this dilemma, players all over the world were asking, who will step forward bravely? The 12 lords, including Ouyang Shuo, all remained silent. They weren't in a hurry to express their opinions. It wasn't that they were cowards, but rather that this matter was of great importance and they had to think it through. Recklessness had never been the character of a lord. October 25, the capital. Gaia's sudden revelation caused the entire game world to fall into an awkward silence. Even the European battlefield, where the battle was the most intense, had a rare temporary pause. Faced with such an unprecedented impact, the domain lords had to slow down and properly organize their thoughts. The only one that was still fighting was India. Great Xia's opponent was an NPC dynasty, so naturally, there was no pressure at all. Ouyang Shua wasn't a sentimental emperor. Although the road to the future had been changed out of nowhere, it wasn't enough to make Ouyang Shua afraid and stop on the road to hegemony. No matter how the future changed, there was no harm in expanding Great Xia's territory in the game world. It was at times like this that the feudal lords needed to show extraordinary determination and courage. They also needed to have a long-term strategic vision. Otherwise, they were destined to be eliminated. The battle in India wasn't intense, and there weren't many variables. The only thing they needed to do was wait for the three armies of Great Xia to flatten the already fragmented Ashoka dynasty. On the morning of the 25th, news of victory came. Under the command of Li Jing, the Great Xia Northern Army was the first to break through Delhi city and obtain a crucial victory in the battle in India. This basically meant that the entire India had been brought under the rule of Great Xia. The remaining sporadic resistance was no longer enough to cause a huge wave. In view of the approaching winter, Ouyang Shua and the cabinet began to study the administrative division of India and the relevant personnel arrangements before the battle in India was completely over. According to the previous plan, the imperial court would establish the Protectorate of South Asia in the entire South Asia subcontinent, which was also the empire's fourth protectorate overseas. In principle, the South Asia Protectorate would be planned to have 6 provinces, 3 of which were named after the old dynasty, namely Ashoka Province, Peacock Province, and Modo Province. They were also the 3 core provinces of the Protectorate. The former Protector General of the Western Border, Feng Qiuhuang, was transferred to the Protector General of South Asia. The situation in India was complicated, and the internal forces were complicated. The degree of recognition of Great Xia was also relatively low. However, its strategic location was very important, and it was densely populated and rich in resources. It wasn't an easy task to govern the South Asia Protectorate well. That was why Ouyang Shua had chosen Feng Qiuhuang, who was outstanding and had once been Prince Jin, to be the Protector General of South Asia and guard this vital place for the empire. Guarding the South Asia Protectorate was basically guarding the entire Indian Ocean. Feng Qiuhuang stepped down as the Protector General of the Western Border and was promoted by the former governor of Minnan, Xiong Ba. There was no doubt that this was an unprecedented important position that Ouyang Shua had placed Xiong Ba in. As a result, Xiong Ba also became the first lord who wasn't from the Mountain and Sea Alliance to take on the position of Protector General. There were 2 reasons for Ouyang Shua to do this. Firstly, Xiong Ba was capable. Many times, Xiong Ba compared himself to Chao Mengde in history, saying that he was a capable minister who ruled the world and an ambitious man in troubled times. As an ambitious man, Xiong Ba had once been glorious, but he was defeated in the end. As a capable minister, he did a good job as the governor of Minnan. The key was that he didn't have any other thoughts. Secondly, he wanted to win over the old aristocratic families. Xiong Ba was one of the representatives of the aristocratic families. His promotion would be a clear signal. Ouyang Shua would never kill the descendants of the aristocratic families. He would only promote talent. Chapter 1339. Apart from the Protector General candidates, Ouyang Shua also named a few officials. The former governor of southern Sichuan, Zhao Pu, was transferred to South Asia Protectorate to assist Feng Qiuhuang in dealing with South Asia affairs. As the founding hero of Northern Song, Zhao Pu was definitely qualified for his new post. The governor of southern Sichuan left by Zhao Pu was promoted to Ouyang Shua's distant third uncle, Ouyang Huan. At this time, the mystery of Ouyang Shua's personnel arrangement in southern Sichuan was finally revealed. 2 years ago, Ouyang Shua had already paved the way for Ouyang Huan to be promoted to governor of southern Sichuan. Although southern Sichuan province was not classified as Zhili province, it was still the capital city and had an extraordinary strategic position. Ouyang Shua could only be assured by handing it over to a member of the royal family. In addition, Lei Fan, the governor of Izhou, was promoted to the governor of Fengduo province. Lei Fan was born as a mountain barbarian and was familiar with the mountains. He was the most suitable person to govern the mountainous Fengduo province. Li Shanzhang, the governor of Xiangnan, was transferred to the governor of Ayu province. Ayu province was the core province of the South Asia Protectorate. Therefore, Ouyang Shua arranged for an experienced official like Li Shanzhang to oversee it as a show of support for the South Asia Protectorate. In addition, the imperial court also chose 2 outstanding officials from the local governors to be promoted to the position of governor of South Asia. The remaining 2 governor positions were reserved for the natives of Tianzhu. At this point, the personnel arrangement of the South Asia Protectorate was finalized. There was the talented Feng Qiuhuang to oversee the overall situation. There were also experienced officials like Zhao Pu and Li Shanzhang as the mainstay. There were also old officials like Lei Fan, newly promoted rookies, and natives. Basically, everything was done. In addition to internal affairs, the army had to be adjusted after the empire took over Tianzhu. After the establishment of the South Asia Protectorate, the South Asia War Zone would be transferred from the previous Xikang province to the South Asia Protectorate to be responsible for the defense of the entire protectorate. Only then would it be justifiable. At the same time, the Xikang Construction Corps that previously belonged to the South Asia War Zone would be transferred to the West Asia War Zone and still be responsible for the development of Xikang Province. The defense of Xikang Province would be the responsibility of the Shijuan Army. In addition to the army, the headquarters of the Indian Ocean Fleet would also be transferred to the Indian Ocean. East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia formed an iron triangle that encompassed the entire Indian Ocean. To put it bluntly, the Indian Ocean had already become the backyard of Great Xia. With this, Great Xia would be able to firmly control the seas in the Indian Ocean. One of the foreseeable benefits was that Great Xia would be able to control the transportation of oil from the Persian Gulf. That's right, the Arabian Empire and the Persian Empire were rich in oil, but without Great Xia's permission, the 2 empires could only use their own oil. Not even a gram of oil could be exported, unless it was transported by land. Based on this, Great Xia had a bargaining chip to keep the 2 empires in check. It could be said that the conquest of India was a milestone for Great Xia. It symbolized that Great Xia had taken a solid step on the road to establishing hegemony in Asia. Unless there was something wrong with their brains, the 2 empires wouldn't openly fall out with Great Xia. This was especially so for the Arab Empire. Limited by the resources of the dynasty, they were extremely dependent on foreign trade. From now on, they would probably have to rely on Great Xia to survive. Ouyang Shua's premonition was right. On the 1st of November, before Great Xia had completely conquered India, the Arab Empire sent out a diplomatic mission and took the initiative to recognize Great Xia as the hegemon of Asia. Imperceptibly, it once again raised the prestige of Great Xia in the world. The news was personally reported to Ouyang Shua by the Chamberlain of Dependencies. At that time, Ouyang Shua was fishing by the lake. Recently, he had developed a habit of coming to the lake to fish whenever he encountered a major event and needed to be alone to think. It was as if his mind would become clearer this way. After listening to Zhang Yi, Ouyang Shua didn't have a trace of joy on his face. Instead, he said worriedly, "I'm afraid that they have ulterior motives. They came with ill intentions. Your Majesty, what do you mean? Zhang Yi didn't understand. Ouyang Shuo smiled and waved his hand. Let's not talk about it now. I'm not sure either. Based on his intuition, Ouyang Shuo felt that things weren't that simple. The Arab Empire wasn't a coward. They shouldn't have rushed over to curry favor with Great Xia. There might be other ulterior motives. For example, they wanted to put Great Xia on a pedestal so that they could hide in the back and avoid being urged to be a scapegoat for the humans on planet Hope. What happened afterward seemed to confirm Ouyang Shuo's judgment. The three major dynasties in Asia, excluding Great Xia, seemed to have agreed beforehand. On the 3rd day of the 11th month of the 9th year of Gaia, the Persian Empire officially recognized Great Xia as the overlord of Asia. The next day, the Romanov dynasty straightforwardly recognized Great Xia as the overlord. With that, the second condition for Great Xia to become an emperor dynasty was officially fulfilled. There was something unusual about the whole thing, especially since the Romanov dynasty, as the overlord, had no reason to rush to recognize Great Xia as the overlord at this time. Once they recognized it, the two countries would be weaker in terms of momentum when they fought on the battlefield in the future. Not only that, once Great Xia became the overlord of Asia, there would be tangible benefits. The most direct benefit was that the financial markets of the three major dynasties had to be opened to Great Xia unconditionally. This had extraordinary strategic significance for the promotion of the Great Xia dollar in Asia. Such an act of taking the initiative to admit defeat was not in line with the style of a warring race. Something even stranger had yet to happen. In the following period of time, the Bantu dynasty in the African continent, the Indian Empire in the American continent, and the Caesar dynasty in the European continent expressed their recognition of Great Xia's global status. Even the archenemy of Great Xia, the Dark Knight Empire, expressed their recognition. The successive declarations of these dynasties were equivalent to sending Great Xia to the throne of the world's first emperor dynasty. Even a blind man would not believe that there was no conspiracy behind this. Although these dynasties expressed their stance one after another, and it seemed chaotic and spontaneous, Ouyang Shuo could tell at a glance that this was the silver hand and azure emblem quietly exerting their strength behind the scenes. The purpose was also very simple. They wanted Great Xia and Ouyang Shuo to be the scapegoat. It could be imagined that once Great Xia was the first to become an emperor dynasty, they would secretly use public opinion to attack and create a great momentum. Then, it was very likely to cause a frenzy of public opinion around the world. Humans were selfish. Even if the players around the world saw through the conspiracy of the two major organizations, they would probably pretend to be deaf and dumb and go with the flow to let Great Xia take on this responsibility. They would step forward bravely and become the great hero of mankind. When that time came, Great Xia, who was completely suppressed, would have to step forward, even if they did not want to. The reason was very simple. Great Xia is the world's number one, it's duty-bound. A huge storm suddenly engulfed the Xia kingdom. Chapter 1340. Faced with the sudden plot, the Great Xia court was in a heated discussion, but no one could come to a conclusion. As the person involved, Ouyang Shuo was very calm and did not care about the commotion of the outside world. 15th of November, Jingshur. The battle in India was coming to an end. Without a leader and with no hope, most of the Ashoka dynasty's army wisely chose to surrender and accept the fact that their country had been destroyed. The sporadic resistance could no longer cause any ripples. With Feng Qiuhuang as the leader, a group of important officials had already rushed to India to cooperate with the army to take over the cities and stabilize the people's hearts, hoping to get the South Asia Protectorate on the right track as soon as possible. The palace. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, Jiang Shang, the first minister of the cabinet, and Zhang Liang, the inner cabinet elder and the seal scholar of the executive cabinet, came uninvited to see His Majesty. Your Majesty, the recent trend is somewhat unfavorable to the Empire, Jiang Shang said worriedly. That's right, there must be a mastermind behind this, Zhang Liang added. Ouyang Shua smiled faintly and asked, My two beloved officials, do you really think so? His eyes were as clear as an abyss, and his gaze seemed to be able to see through one's heart. This, Jiang Shang and Zhang Liang looked at each other with a calm expression. They were both extremely intelligent people, so their view of the problem was naturally not so simple. The above point of view was just the mainstream view of the court. The two of them came to find out more about His Majesty's background, but they did not expect His Majesty to see through them. It was a little embarrassing. Your Majesty is wise. The two of them could be considered old foxes, so they respectfully flattered him. Ouyang Shua did not beat around the bush. He stood up and walked in front of the global map. He said slowly, The empire grew from a small village with nothing to a global empire with billions of people. It was not my contribution alone, but the people's aspiration, the army's morale, and the work of the officials. I rose from the wilderness, and my achievements today are all thanks to opportunities. It can be said to be a gathering of wind and clouds. After a pause, Ouyang Shua continued, Therefore, no matter how the outside world operates or how noisy it is, I will not shirk from this expedition to Planet Hope. This is the responsibility given to me by the era. I cannot shirk it, and I do not want to shirk it. Ouyang Shua's words came from the bottom of his heart. The moment Hope City was destroyed by the ferocious beasts, Ouyang Shua had an impulse. His blood boiled, and he had the lofty sentiments he had when he first arrived in the wilderness. He wanted to see for himself what kind of dangerous place Planet Hope was. Ouyang Shua had never been a short-sighted person. He knew all too well what this second trip to Hope Planet to establish a forward operating base meant for the interstellar fleet and even the human race. In the face of the survival of the species, personal gains and losses were nothing. It wasn't that Ouyang Shua was arrogant, but in the entire world, the most suitable person to carry out this task was none other than Ouyang Shua. If other overlords were to go, he wouldn't feel at ease. Perhaps this was fate. When Jiang Shang and Zhang Liang heard this, they were moved and bowed in unison. Your Majesty is benevolent. Both of them had the same point of view. From their point of view, the Great Xia team was the most suitable team for this expedition to Hope Planet. They should show an imposing manner. If they were to be secretive, it would seem too petty. Ouyang Shua waved his hand and asked the two officials to sit down. He restrained his emotions and said with a smile, Therefore, this storm isn't a crisis, but an excellent opportunity. As for how to make good use of it, I'll have to rely on you all to come up with a plan. Since the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge wanted to be the masterminds behind the scenes, Ouyang Shua was naturally happy to go with the flow and make use of this opportunity to promote the Great Xia to an imperial dynasty. Before this, Ouyang Shua was still worrying about how to win against the Dawson dynasty and be the first to be recognized by all the dynasties in the world. Ouyang Shua wanted to let these two organizations know what it meant to shoot oneself in the foot. Remember, the hearts of the people can be used, and public opinion can be guided according to the situation. Your subjects will not disappoint your Majesty. Jiang Shang and Zhang Liang accepted the decree. For the time being, don't announce our stance to the outside world. Stick to one principle. Don't respond, don't deny, don't admit, Ouyang Shua instructed. Your subject understands. Then let's leave it at that for now. The cabinet will each draft a report. As for the specifics, we'll discuss it next time. Ouyang Shua didn't let the two officials slap their heads on the spot. Although the decisions of the Great Xia Imperial Court depended on Jiang Shang and the other officials, there was still a group of capable officials under them who supported the entire internal affairs system, making the decisions of the Imperial Court more scientific. Yes, Jiang Shang and Zhang Liang, the two officials, bid farewell and left in satisfaction. In the afternoon, Ouyang Shua secretly summoned the commander of the Mountain Sea Guards, Shun Buhai, the commander of the Military Affairs Department, Eli, and the commander of the Black Snake Guards through the communication compass. There was only one goal, which was to let the three organizations secretly monitor the Great Xia Empire during this period of time. They wanted to see who was in favor of the Great Xia Empire stepping forward and who wasn't. Ouyang Shua wanted to make use of this opportunity to get a good feel of the background of his officials. In the future, when they went to Planet Hope, Ouyang Shua would definitely bring a team with him. Therefore, from now on, Ouyang Shua would start planning to split the Great Xia Empire into two groups. One group would go to Planet Hope, while the other would stay in the game world. The selection of people to go to Planet Hope, other than the construction needs, this observation was very important. Just like that, without anyone noticing, a trap set up by the three major organizations had quietly covered the skies of the Empire, observing everything in silence. The fates of many people might change because of this. At night, Ouyang Shua returned to his bedroom. During dinner, Ouyang Shua noticed that there was something wrong with his wife's expression. After going to bed, he couldn't help but ask, "Do you have something on your mind?" Song Jia lay in her husband's arms, her bright eyes staring straight at him. She said slowly, "Have you made up your mind? You already know?" Ouyang Shua didn't seem surprised. The husband and wife were too familiar with each other. It was difficult to hide anything from each other. "I know your determination, and I also know that my husband is a man of indomitable spirit. No matter what the outside world says, you will definitely go." Song Jia's voice was low. "Yes." Ouyang Shua was speechless for a moment. He didn't know how to face his wife. No matter what he said during the day, when he returned home, he was still a husband, the father of a pair of children, the pillar of the family, and the object of concern for his family. "What do you plan to do with Yuer and Luo?" Song Jia finally asked. Ouyang Shua was silent. Everyone knew about the dangers of Planet Hope. Even Ouyang Shua didn't have the confidence to say that he could definitely do better than the advance fleet and truly establish a foothold on Planet Hope. Therefore, it was not suitable to bring a pair of children along. Chapter 1341. Even a man of steel had his moments of tenderness. How could a king be heartless? Ouyang Shua could stand up without hesitation and show off his dominance. The only thing he could not face was the worry of his family and the separation from his two children. Nothing could be more cruel than this. Song Jia understood her husband very well. Before going to sleep, she whispered, "Don't worry. Our children and I will wait for you." She believed that her husband would definitely be able to turn misfortune into fortune and create another legend. "I look forward to the day you bring us to Hope Planet in a grand manner," Song Jia said. Ouyang Shua did not say anything, nor did he make any promises. He just tightened his grip on his wife's hand. With a wife like this, what more could a husband ask for? The night was quiet. In the blink of an eye, the 9 years of Gaia were coming to an end. Winter once again descended on the earth. The entire world was silent. This winter was colder than the previous years. The destruction of Hope City was like a huge mountain that pressed down on all of humanity. During this period, the Gangder dynasty, the Gaul dynasty, and the Germanic dynasty expressed their approval of the Xia kingdom. Only the Dawson dynasty had yet to express their stance. From the looks of it, it was only a matter of time before Jack expressed his stance. The reason why he had not expressed his stance yet was probably because there was still half a year before the deadline given by Gaia. Jack did not want the Xia kingdom to take advantage of him. The Silver Hand and the Azure Badge must be using this opportunity to continue to build momentum. The direction of public opinion was already moving in the direction they expected. Ouyang Shua, the strongest emperor who rose from the wilderness, was being molded into a global leader. Ouyang Shua was being deified. Regarding this, there were many discussions in the Xia kingdom. Some were in favor, some were against, some were silent, and some were clamoring. All kinds of life could be seen in one city and one place, making people speechless. As the center of the whirlpool, the palace was solemn, but it was frighteningly silent. It was like a giant hibernating beast, sleeping silently as if it did not care about the disturbances of the outside world. Even the important officials of the imperial court kept their mouths shut, which was rare. The tacit approval of the Xia kingdom encouraged the arrogance of the silver hand and the azure badge. They spared no effort in advertising. Ouyang Shua's prestige grew day by day. Before this, the global battlefields, including India, stopped uniformly, whether it was because of the cold winter or other reasons. The world once again became silent, as if night had fallen. December 15th, the capital. As the end of the year approached, Ouyang Shua became even busier. There were many occasions that required his attendance, many summaries required his approval, and many important matters required his final decision. Meetings were held one after another, and inspections were carried out one after another. While he was busy, he seemed to have temporarily forgotten about the troubles of Hope Planet. No matter what, life had to go on. Ouyang Shua had recently been planning the second batch of names to make preparations for the upcoming expedition. Naturally, he had put in a lot of thought into who to choose and who to keep. At 3:00 in the afternoon, Ouyang Shua was reading the memorials in the imperial study. Suddenly, Ouyang Shua's face froze, revealing a surprised and complicated expression. He then shouted towards the door, "Someone come! Here!" The divine martial guard captain on duty walked in. "Summon the emperor. From now on, without our summons, no one is allowed to approach the imperial study." Ouyang Shua gave a rare order to clear the area. The captain's eyes froze, but he didn't dare to argue. He only said, "Yes, Your Majesty. The divine martial guard will be on guard in the surroundings. If Your Majesty has any orders, please come at any time." Ouyang Shua nodded and waved his hand to dismiss him. Retreating together with them were the female officials who served as scouts in the imperial study, as well as the scholars of the Pavilion of Secret Texts on duty. Soon, only Ouyang Shua was left in the large imperial study. Even the doors and windows were closed, completely blocking the prying gazes of outsiders. No one knew what was going on in the imperial study. In the blink of an eye, after the imperial study was cleared, a goddess dressed in palace attire appeared in front of Ouyang Shua. She had a flawless face and a golden ratio attire. There was not a single blemish. Even the creator would be in awe of him. The only flaw was that the goddess' eyes were as calm as an abyss, cold and emotionless. This is Gaia. Outsiders would find it hard to imagine that Gaia would take the initiative to visit a player. Even Ouyang Shua seemed to be slightly surprised and said with a bitter smile, "I never expected that you would come." Guya didn't say anything. He waved his right hand and a chair appeared out of thin air. Guya sat on the chair and looked at Ouyang Shua at eye level. He said, "Some things are best discussed face to face." Ouyang Shua fell silent. He roughly guessed Gaia's purpose for coming here. Others might not know Ouyang Shua's decision, but as the god of games, Gaia definitely knew. "I'm duty-bound." Ouyang Shua didn't hide it. "That's good," Guya said and suddenly fiddled with his hair. That moment of grace made Ouyang Shua a little dazed. The temptation of a god was not something that ordinary people could resist. "Even if you don't take the initiative to go, I will let you go," Guya said. Ouyang Shua smiled bitterly. "You think too highly of me." Gaia said, "You are the child of destiny. Just like you said, this is your destiny that you can't avoid." Ouyang Shua's eyes focused and his heart skipped a beat. His palms were covered in a layer of sweat, which was rare. It was as if the deepest secret hidden in his heart had suddenly been revealed. He was a little panicked, but there was also a hint of indescribable excitement. "I don't understand what you mean." Ouyang Shua forced himself to calm down and stared at Guya with a burning gaze. Under his seemingly calm appearance, there was already a hidden energy like a volcano that could erupt at any time. Ouyang Shua's cultivation of the five emperors' true scriptures had obviously reached an extremely profound level. Even in the entire Great Xia, there were only a few people who could compare to Ouyang Shua in terms of individual strength. He was low-key and reserved, but it didn't mean that he didn't have explosive power. On the contrary, the heavy administrative work, the incessant scheming and planning did not disrupt Ouyang Shua's cultivation plan. Ouyang Shua's persistence on the path of martial arts often made Song Jia blush with shame. In fact, even if Ouyang Shua didn't have any guards to protect him, it would be very difficult to hurt him in the wilderness. But Ouyang Shua didn't show it at all. This was one of Ouyang Shua's biggest trump cards. According to Ouyang Shua's calculations, he was confident that he could even fight against a titan, let alone an ordinary feral beast. Although he couldn't say that he could win, it was still possible for him to remain undefeated. This was also one of the reasons why Ouyang Shua was so determined to go to Planet Hope. If he didn't have a few tricks up his sleeves, he wouldn't dare to go there. If there were experts here, they would definitely notice that the current imperial study was no longer shrouded by a mysterious aura. This meant that Ouyang Shua's cultivation had already reached an extremely profound level. This also showed how vigilant Ouyang Shua was at this moment. Gu Ye, who was sitting opposite him, suddenly smiled and said with satisfaction, "Your cultivation is not bad, but it's useless against me." Chapter 1342. Ouyang Shua was disappointed. In the game world, Gaia was a true god. Everyone was powerless in front of her. Ouyang Shua's vigilance was naturally very weak. "Tell me, what do you know?" Ouyang Shua gave up resisting. Gaia was very straightforward. "Do you want to know the secret of your rebirth?" Ouyang Shua's heart skipped a beat again. As expected, his biggest secret, a secret that even Song Jia and Binger didn't know, was actually known by Gaia. At this moment, Ouyang Shua even felt that it was a little unreal. The secret that was hidden in the depths of his heart, a secret that no one could tell him, was easily exposed by Gaia. Ouyang Shua's defense was immediately broken, and he seemed to be at a loss. In fact, Ouyang Shua was really curious. He still couldn't understand why an ordinary reincarnation would become an unbelievable rebirth. "Speak." Ouyang Shua calmed down. As early as 3 years ago, the advantage of being reborn was already negligible to Ouyang Shua. Ouyang Shua also didn't expect that this secret would be revealed one day. Since Gaia took the initiative to visit, she wouldn't have any evil intentions towards Ouyang Shua. Uncovering this mystery was actually equivalent to untying the biggest knot in Ouyang Shua's heart. Keeping such a secret was obviously not an easy task. More importantly, if rebirth could only be attributed to mysticism, then Ouyang Shua's current world would still be separated by a thin layer, unable to see the truth of the world. Perhaps the recent stagnation in his cultivation wasn't unrelated to this knot in his heart. It happened 4 years ago. Gaia began to narrate an unknown history. Ouyang Shua listened and was dumbfounded. On the day of your rebirth, the interstellar fleet was going through a very ordinary wormhole jump. Normally, in less than a second, the fleet would pass through the wormhole and appear in space hundreds of light years away. But an accident happened. During the jump, a time ripple suddenly appeared in the wormhole. Coincidentally, it hit the game cabin you were in. Space-time folded, bringing you to 5 years ago. When the fleet passed through the wormhole, the game cabin that had disappeared reappeared miraculously. What was even weirder was that, because of the space-time effect, the entire game world was remade and changed drastically. At that time, Ouyang Shua had already changed from a nameless adventurer to the ruler of Great Xia, causing chaos in the Huaxia region and even the entire game world. From then on, the entire world was completely different. Ouyang Shua asked, "Do you mean that in the 5 years I spent in Gaia, in that short second, I had actually experienced a reincarnation in the spatial tunnel? You can understand it that way. Gaia nodded. After that, I checked the surveillance footage and accidentally discovered that your game capsule had disappeared for a second. That's how I came to this conclusion. Wait, what you said just now was a guess. Ouyang Shuo suddenly felt that something was wrong. His eyes opened wide as he asked in disbelief. In other words, you're actually unable to confirm that I've been reborn once? No, I've already confirmed it. Gaia was very calm, but Ouyang Shuo was so angry that he vomited blood. He never expected that his life of scheming would end up in Gaia's hands. He had been tricked by Gaia. This goddess was a little out of character. Although he was angry, Ouyang Shuo still heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. The so-called rebirth was actually a space-time travel. Could be completely explained by science. It wasn't some mysticism, nor was it some metaphysical thing. The world before him, be it the game or reality, was extremely real. At that moment, Ouyang Shuo's mind became clear once again. He looked up and sensed the world. It was as though the invisible barrier from before had suddenly disappeared. The world became clear. Great. Ouyang Shuo revealed a rare smile and no longer cared about Gaia's tricks. His state of mind was unprecedentedly good. Thank you. Looking at Gaia opposite him, Ouyang Shuo sincerely thanked her. If not for Gaia's explanation, he was afraid that he would have to live with this secret for the rest of his life. Gaia said, I'm a Homo sapiens. I've never believed in fate. But since that time Ripple coincidentally chose you, I'm still somewhat looking forward to it. Ouyang Shuo nodded in agreement. Sometimes the world was just so wonderful. If one were to read history and look back, they would discover that some of the major inventions or major historical events in history would often originate from a seemingly insignificant matter. Then, they would flap the wings of a butterfly and ultimately change the flow of the river of history. Ouyang Shuo's rebirth, this time, was essentially the same as those major events. It wasn't anything special. Fortunately, I didn't waste this opportunity. Ouyang Shuo was very confident. Not all rebirths could create miracles. Even if an ordinary person was given a chance to be reborn, he or she might not be able to do anything earth-shattering. The final outcome would probably still be very miserable. Ouyang Shuo's luck didn't bring shame to the reborn. Gaia nodded. Obviously, he agreed with this. Let's talk about going to Hope Planet. Gaia started talking about another matter. Ouyang Shuo's expression turned solemn. He knew that this was the real topic. Otherwise, Gaia wouldn't be so bored as to specially come over to explain the secret of rebirth to him. To Gaia, the past didn't have much meaning. The development of Planet Hope concerned the future and destiny of mankind. It was also Gaia's highest mission. This was the most important thing that Gaia had in front of him. This time, I'll allocate 2 starships to you for the development of Planet Hope. The relevant resources will also be prepared for you as much as possible. What other requests do you have? Just say them all, Gaia said. When Ouyang Shuo heard this, he didn't know what to say for a moment. To be honest, his mind was in a mess. He still hadn't sorted out an accurate train of thought. He really didn't know what to say when Ouyang Shuo suddenly made a request. Can you give me a batch of the spots to materialize Homo sapiens for free? Ouyang Shuo asked. Materializing a Homo sapiens required 500,000 achievement points. Even if Ouyang Shuo had close to 100 million achievement points, he couldn't afford such a consumption. Moreover, how could he maintain his clearance level if he used up all of them? It seemed that he couldn't have his cake and eat it too. Gaia was very decisive. I can give you 10 spots. Any more and you'll exceed your clearance. Homo sapiens didn't materialize out of thin air. It required a lot of precious resources, and Gaia couldn't afford it. The spots will be given to you through rewards when Grand Xia becomes an imperial dynasty. Gaia still had to go through the procedures. Even the god of games couldn't do whatever he wanted. Everything had to follow the rules of the game world, and Gaia couldn't break it. Chapter 1343. What about the mecha manufacturing technology and materialization technology? Can we share them? Ouyang Shuo asked. Ambition. Ouyang Shuo did not conceal his ambition to escape Gaia's control. With these two key technologies, even without Gaia's support, Ouyang Shuo would be able to build an extremely luxurious team, completely free from the limitations of achievement points. Ordinary people abided by the rules, but emperors were used to subverting them. Ouyang Shuo was looking forward to the day when he could establish the Order of Planet Hope on his own. Don't beat around the bush when you talk to Gaia. Just like now, Gaia clearly understood Ouyang Shuo's ambition. As long as it was harmless to humans, she wouldn't care. Gaia followed the rules. Sharing for free won't do. According to the plan, an exchange system would be established between the base and the resource planets in the future. The base uses biological resources to exchange for resource planet technology and products, Gaia explained. Gaia had obviously come up with a complete set of plans with his supercomputing abilities. Ouyang Shuo even guessed that Gaia's decision to have the interstellar fleet dock on a resource planet was not a spur-of-the-moment idea. Instead, it was a backup plan that had been in place a long time ago. Predicting the worst-case scenario and making contingency plans were the forte of a top-notch artificial intelligence like Gaia. Ouyang Shuo's eyes narrowed. So you're saying that in the future, the relationship between the base and the interstellar fleets won't be one of superior and subordinate, but more like a cooperative model, each taking what they need? If that was the case, the base would have a lot of autonomy. As for the equivalent exchange that Gaia mentioned, it was also a cooperative model that Ouyang Shuo highly recommended. It was not Ouyang Shuo's style to expect a free lunch and take advantage of others. You can understand it that way. After the disbanding of the Federation, Gaia took on the role of a guardian of humanity and did not seek leadership. Ouyang Shuo took a long look at Gaia and asked the question in his heart. So, if nothing happens to the base, you don't plan to step onto Hope Planet? You are very smart. A ripple finally appeared in Gaia's eyes. She did not hide it from Ouyang Shuo and said what Ouyang Shuo did not say. Resource planets are not suitable for human survival, but for Homo sapiens, there is no problem. Gaia was already preparing to turn the resource planet into the home planet of the Homo sapiens. That way, humans would settle on Hope Planet and Homo sapiens would settle on Resource Planet. They would complement each other and not interfere with each other, forming a beneficial symbiotic relationship. Perhaps this was the way out that Gaia had found for Homo sapiens. Ouyang Shuo sighed inwardly. Perhaps this was the best outcome for both sides. Not all humans could treat NPCs the same way he did. The hostility of the species could never be eradicated. Can you do me a small favor? Ouyang Shuo asked in the end. His tone wasn't one of routine business, and it was more like a request between friends, and it carried a trace of warmth. Although the two of them did not meet often, they felt like old friends at first sight. Go ahead. Gaia gave a charming smile. Ouyang Shuo smiled and made his request. Gaia did not hesitate and immediately agreed. That's settled then. Gaia did not bother with pleasantries. He turned into a white light and disappeared from the imperial study together with his chair. No one knew that Gaia had been here before. This secret conversation would not be revealed until 200 years later. It became an extraordinary historic conversation between the leaders of the two planets, which would be recorded in history. December 20th. Soon after sending Gaia off, Ouyang Shuo began to deal with the aftermath of the battle in India. Due to the destruction of Hope City, the resistance of the Indian players toward Great Xia was greatly reduced. They helped the Great Xia army wipe out the remaining enemies and remove the last obstacle. After winter, the war was basically over. A few days ago, the Imperial Guards, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Southern Frontier Army, and the Western General, who had participated in the war, had already withdrawn from the front lines and returned to their respective garrisons. The defense of India was completely taken over by the South Asian theater of operations. According to the post-war statistics, after the destruction of the three Indian dynasties, there were still nearly 1 million prisoners of war waiting to be reorganized, in addition to replenishing the losses, arranging for the retirement of the wounded, and eliminating unqualified soldiers. Among them were 300,000 soldiers of the Peacock dynasty who had previously surrendered to the Ashoka dynasty. How ironic! These prisoners of war were all elites, and how to deal with them was a thorny matter. Arranging for them to be retired or transferred to civilian work was undoubtedly a huge waste and could easily cause hidden dangers to public security. After all, the size of this batch of prisoners of war was twice the size of the South Asian theater of operations. In view of this, with Ouyang Shua's approval, the million prisoners of war were temporarily reorganized into 4 corps and temporarily given the designations of the South Asian First Army to the Fourth Army. The 4 corps were temporarily placed under the jurisdiction of the South Asian Theater of Operations and led by the Grand Council. The Imperial Court already had a preliminary plan on how to maximize the role of the 4 corps and use it where it needed to be carried out at the beginning of spring. What they needed to do now was to appease the emotions of the 4 corps and have a good rest. After the beginning of spring, this would be a destructive force that would help the Empire realize its new strategic ambitions. The 10th year of Gaia, the first day of the first month. Without the usual system update, the arrival of the 10th year of Gaia seemed somewhat quiet. At the beginning of the new year, the Imperial Court of the Great Xia issued a personnel appointment. The decree was to remove King Ouyang Bing from his position as a scholar of the Secret Texts Pavilion and transfer her to the position of Honglu Vice Minister and Deputy Commander of the Jiangyi Theater of Operations, effective immediately. The experience in the Secret Texts Pavilion had made Binger familiar with the internal affairs of the Empire. Seeing that there was not much time left, and Ouyang Shua could not wait any longer, he could only let Binger step into the 2 major fields of diplomacy and military affairs to make the final preparations for the upcoming regent. The identity of Honglu Vice Minister gave Binger the opportunity to represent the Empire in global diplomacy and enhance his personal prestige. The position of Deputy Commander of the Jiangyi Theater of Operations was even more important. In the future, Ouyang Shua was prepared to hand over the Jiangyi Theater of Operations to Binger. Only with military power could Binger have a stable position as the regent. Otherwise, Ouyang Shua would not be able to head to Planet Hope with peace of mind. The last insurance was Gaia's protection of Binger. Other than the official appointment, Binger also served as the deputy commander of the Mountain Sea Guards and began to come into contact with the intelligence network. It was unprecedented for Binger to have 3 jobs at the same time, involving military, diplomatic, and intelligence. The 10th year of Gaia was a very crucial year for Binger. In the blink of an eye, it was already March. There were only 3 months left to the deadline given by Gaia. With the silver hand and the azure emblem adding fuel to the fire, Ouyang Shua's expedition to Planet Hope was almost a done deal. The wave of public opinion had already formed. All that was left was the final blow. He believed that the Dawson Empire would soon express its approval of the Great Xia and give the Great Xia the position of sovereign. Before this, whether it was the European battlefield or the African battlefield, there was a rare silence. It was so calm that it was unbelievable. Under the calm, a storm was quietly brewing. Chapter 1344. The 10th year of Gaia, March 5. What was surprising was that the first battle in the decade of Gaia did not happen in Europe, but in Asia. On that day, Great Xia officially declared war on the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had a vast territory, with a total of around 30 million players. Even after the Mongolian Empire's westward expedition, the empire's total army was still around 2 million. On top of that, the Persian Gulf was once seen as a rising empire in Asia. Furthermore, apart from the war with the Mongolian Empire, the Persian Empire rarely participated in foreign wars. It was stable internally, prosperous in trade, and relatively developed in industry. It was the last significant opponent of Great Xia in Asia. Before attacking India, Ouyang Shua had not thought about whether to declare war on the Persian Empire. The smooth progress of the battle in India had not only won another heavyweight protectorate for Great Xia, but they had also accumulated 1 million elite troops. This gave Ouyang Shua the confidence to wage war against Persia. His status as the hegemon of Asia also helped him in this battle. In order to take down the Persian Empire as soon as possible, Ouyang Shua wasn't careless at all this time. He mobilized the upper, middle, and lower armies, a total of 31 legions, 1,550,000 soldiers. The upper army consisted of the 4 corps of the Fengxiang army, which belonged to the North Asian War Zone. They marched from the North Pagoda Pass of the western frontier province. The commander of the Fengxiang army, General Guizi, was appointed as the commander of the upper army. The Central Army consisted of 4 legions of the Flying Bear Army and 3 legions of the Western Army, which belonged to the West Asia Theater of Operations, and 3 legions of the Western Army. They marched from the southern pass of the Western Frontier Province. Divine General Wang Jian was appointed as the commander of the Central Army. The Lower Army consisted of South Asia's First Army to the Fourth Army, totaling 1 million soldiers. They were also the main force of the expedition against the Persian Empire, and they set off from Ashoka Province. Divine General Li Jing personally led the expedition. In addition, the Indian Ocean Fleet would also launch an attack on the coastal areas of the Persian Empire from the sea. After defeating an enemy, they would use the country's military strength to attack the next target. This method was very similar to the meat grinder plan that Jia Su had proposed on the battlefield of Tubo. It could also be considered as creating a model for Great Xia. If things went smoothly, the model could continue to operate. The foundation of this operation was thanks to Great Xia's success in the Tianzhu battlefield. It was precisely by relying on unconventional tactics like the Imperial Death Talisman that the Great Xia army was able to achieve an easy victory. If they continued to fight head-on with the Ashoka dynasty, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. The Xia kingdom's sudden declaration of war was undoubtedly an unacceptable disaster for the Persian Empire. Even though the Persian Empire had 2 million soldiers, it was very difficult for them to find an opportunity to win against the 3 armies of Great Xia. The internal stability of the Persian Empire was both an advantage and a great disadvantage. Among the 2 million soldiers, more than half of them were reorganized by the imperial guards of various countries. They had basically never experienced any wars, so their actual combat ability was really worrying. Otherwise, the Mongol Empire wouldn't have been able to beat the Persian Empire so badly. As compared to the Mongolian cavalry, the Great Xia army was much stronger. The 1.5 million soldiers of Great Xia were equivalent to at least 3 million soldiers of the Persian Empire, or even more if they were to convert their combat power into one. How could the Persian Empire win? The only way was to ask for help from their allies. There were 3 dynasties that bordered the Persian Empire and belonged to the Silver Hands camp. They were the Arab Empire, the Caesar dynasty, and the Romanov dynasty. The Caesar dynasty and the Romanov dynasty were trapped in the European battlefield. They were still hoping for the Persian Empire to send reinforcements. They did not have the energy to help the Persian Empire. In particular, the Romanov dynasty was busy attacking the Germanic Empire. The sparsely populated Far East region bordering the Persian Empire was lacking in support. The most likely candidate was the Arab Empire. The 2 empires had the same origin, but because of different beliefs, they were divided into 2 empires. At that time, Their relationship wasn't very friendly. It was really unknown whether the Arab Empire could lend a helping hand. Needless to say, the Arab Empire also had to face the direct threat of Great Xia in the African theater. After thinking about it, the Persian Empire could only face the battle alone. Great Xia's declaration of war against Persia was like a nuclear bomb that stirred up the calm global situation. It wasn't just the Persian Empire who was the victim. Other people didn't expect that Great Xia, which was deeply involved in the whirlpool of public opinion, would continue to expand and continue its path of hegemony in the game world. It seemed that the destruction of Hope City didn't have any impact on Great Xia's strategic decision. This naturally became a reason for the Silver Hand to attack Great Xia. The problem was that the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge were trying to create a great and righteous image of Ouyang Shua. If they stood up to accuse Ouyang Shua at this time, all their previous efforts would be wasted. Therefore, they could only remain silent and swallow their pride. I'm starting to suspect that Ouyang Shua saw this subtle opportunity, which is why he wantonly started the war. Jack, who was on the other side of the ocean, couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't that Jack didn't know the strategic position of the Persian Empire, nor did he not know how valuable the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf were. However, in the face of the Persian Empire's request for help, the Dawson dynasty was really helpless. After taking down India, Great Xia's strategic depth was terrifying. Their overall strength had risen to a new level, and it was really not something that the Dawson dynasty could contend with head-on. This was also one of the reasons why the Silver Hand was so anxious to send away the god of plague, Ouyang Shua. Although there were rumors that Ouyang Shua was trying his best to train a successor, Jack was still very confident in dealing with a little girl like Ouyang Bing. Great Xia's declaration of war also caused the temporarily cooled-down global battlefield to be reactivated. Ordinary players couldn't understand the hidden meaning behind Great Xia's declaration of war, but the lords were very clear about it. In a sense, with the destruction of Hope City and the obstruction of human settlement on Hope, the status of the game world didn't decline, but instead rose, becoming a real second world. In the foreseeable future, the majority of human beings would continue to live in the game world. Therefore, the fight for dominance in the game world had become even more important than before, even surpassing the fight for the 3 spot. This was a move to divide the cake, and the most important thing was to not fall behind. Precisely because of this, Ouyang Shua could ignore the public opinion of the outside world and brazenly declare war on the Persian Empire not long after the Indian War had ended. This was the source of the internal logic. If they could defeat the Persian Empire and completely control the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf, in the future wave of industrial competition, Great Xia would basically be invincible. The current Ouyang Shua was like a father who was about to go on a long journey. He always wanted to do his best before he left, so as to leave behind a solid family business for his successor, Bing. Otherwise, even if he left, he wouldn't feel at ease. Chapter 1345. Great Xia's disruption made the feudal lords, who were still in a daze, wake up. They temporarily forgot about Planet Hope and put in more effort to start the war of annexation in the game world. The first to bear the brunt was the European battlefield. The Germanic dynasty continued to use the remaining troops to restrain the Gangder dynasty, and at the same time, increased the intensity of their attack on the Gaul dynasty. They had to fight it out. There were also rumors that King Henry of Gaul, who was about to collapse under the pressure, had already had a secret conversation with King Manstein of the Germanic dynasty. The two dynasties seemed to be looking for a way to resolve the dispute to avoid both sides suffering losses. According to the Black Snake Guards, the Prime Minister of the Germanic dynasty, the famous Prime Minister of Iron and Blood, Bismarck, was recently having a secret meeting with the Prime Minister of the Gaul dynasty, Richelieu. Both Prime Ministers were god-level talent. All signs indicated that the European continent was about to usher in a major change. The Romanov dynasty did not want to be outdone. Taking advantage of the Germanic dynasty's preoccupation, they wantonly occupied the northern territory of the Germanic dynasty and expanded the strategic depth of the capital, St. Petersburg. As for the Caesar dynasty, it was difficult for them to do anything big. Year 10 of Gaia, 10th of March, Jingshur. The War of Persia had already broken out. One after another, the field army crossed the border and brazenly charged into Persia, setting off a war of the century that would affect the new structure of Asia. Massive amounts of rations and supplies were also continuously being transported to the front line. The abundant rations and supplies in the South Asian Protectorate ensured the logistics of this war, allowing millions of troops to enter the war without any worries. Facing the attack of Great Xia, the Persian king issued a war mobilization order, and at the same time, issued a Level 1 war readiness order, saying that they would use the power of the country to resist the invasion of Great Xia. The Persian king even shouted the slogan, "Defend my country, protect my home," to boost morale. What made people helpless was that because of the destruction of the City of Hope, Ouyang Shua's popularity among the players exploded, and some people made him the best candidate to open up Planet Hope. Therefore, the Persian players were unusually passive in this war. If Ouyang Shua really took the initiative to open up Planet Hope, he would be the savior of mankind, a great hero, and Great Xia would fully deserve to be the overlord of the world. Merging with Great Xia would not be so unacceptable. It was not difficult to understand why the Persian players chose to watch from the sidelines. The passive response of the Persian players caused the Persian army to lose their convenient communication network, and their scouting ability was greatly reduced. When faced with the attack of the Great Xia army, they became increasingly powerless. The scales of the war tilted in favor of the Great Xia from the very beginning. At this moment, the Great Xia army, which had conquered India, was in high spirits. With the momentum of a great victory, they had the attitude of the hegemon of Asia and were moving unhindered within Persia's borders, seizing cities and seizing territory. Wherever the army went, blood flowed like rivers. Fresh blood dyed the Great Xia flag red, strengthening the might of the Great Xia army and forming an unstoppable momentum. Heaven and earth were shaking, and so were the enemies. The invincible image of the Great Xia army, which was invincible and all-conquering, was quietly spreading throughout the Persian Empire, further crumbling the will of the Persian army to resist. Perhaps, from the very beginning, this was an asymmetric war. Furthermore, Great Xia's Indian Ocean fleet had firmly sealed off the coast of the Persian Empire, causing the maritime trade of the Persian Empire to come to a standstill. Not a single merchant ship could enter or leave the port. This was undoubtedly a disaster for the Persian Empire that relied on import. The Persian Empire was immediately plunged into internal and external troubles. Great Xia's attack on the Persian Empire was all-encompassing, causing the Persian Empire to be unable to resist at all. Defeat was only a matter of time. The development of the situation surprised even Ouyang Shua. Before this, he didn't realize that Great Xia had already become a global empire and the hegemon of the seas. Great Xia actually didn't feel the slightest bit of pressure when it came to conquering a medium-sized country like the Persian Empire. From this, it could be seen that in terms of overall national strength, military strength, and other aspects, Great Xia's strength had already far surpassed that of the other empires. Even the Dawson Empire found it hard to catch up to them. Perhaps, at the moment when India was conquered, the deterrence that Great Xia had accumulated around the world had already reached a peak, transforming into a superpower of the entire world. In the game, there was a new situation where one superpower had many strong players. This kind of outcome shouldn't simply be attributed to fate. Ouyang Shua was deep in thought. During the 10 years of Gaia, Great Xia's global plans weren't just limited to the Persian Empire. At the military and political conference before the new year, Ouyang Shua and the other ministers established a new round of strategy for Great Xia. It was a magnificent blueprint. Time was of the essence. Seeing that the resource planet was already in sight, Ouyang Shua's vision wouldn't just stop at the Persian battlefield. As long as there was a chance, the new plan would be implemented very quickly. In the 10 years of Gaia, it was time for this huge game of chess to be completely reeled in. With Great Xia's current development, it wouldn't take more than a month to prepare for a war. And once they attacked, it had to be decided in one battle. Hesitation or procrastination weren't the style of Great Xia. The Great Xia that Ouyang Shua had created was a ferocious beast. Once it locked onto its prey, it would strike. In comparison, the war in Europe that had dragged on until now was like a child's play. Even the initiator, Ouyang Shua, didn't expect that the war in Europe had dragged on until now without a decisive outcome. The Europeans were famous for being a troublemaker and petty bunt. Imperial Palace, Imperial Study. Has the information been confirmed? Ouyang Shua asked. Sitting opposite Ouyang Shua was the commander of the Black Snake Guards, Black Snake, who was in charge of overseas intelligence. Your Majesty, the information is absolutely true. The Gaul dynasty and the Germanic dynasty are going to regroup. The information revealed by Black Snake was enough to shock the world. As the information was too crucial, Black Snake didn't hesitate to personally rush to the base city to confirm the authenticity of the information before making a special trip back to report to His Majesty. Black Snake, who had always been in charge of overseas intelligence, was very clear about the weight of the information. Indeed, Ouyang Shua was very happy to receive Black Snake's confirmation. He was generous with his praise. The Black Snake Guards did a great job this time. After you leave, reward the men who obtained the information on my behalf. Thank you, Your Majesty. Black Snake bowed excitedly. It was an extremely great honor to receive His Majesty's praise. Of course, the Black Snake Guards were also worthy of such praise. Even a fool knew that the regrouping of the Gaul dynasty and the Germanic dynasty was a top secret. It was basically the top secret of the two dynasties. The Black Snake Guard could even investigate this kind of intelligence. It could be imagined to what extent this intelligence organization had developed after several years of operation. It was simply terrifying. So, the current war between the two countries is just an act. A playful smile appeared on Ouyang Shua's face. As expected of Henry. He's very sensible and knows when to advance and when to retreat. Knowing that he could not survive, Henry displayed the boldness that an emperor should have. He decisively broke away from the shackles of the Silver Hand and brazenly joined the Azure Badge's camp. In order to survive, Henry did not hesitate to change. Unlike the former king of Spain, Cassius, who was incessant and reluctant to give up, he was gradually nibbled away by Ouyang Shua and the Azure Badge like a frog in warm water. In the end, not even his bones were left. Ouyang Shua did not have to think to know what kind of fate Cassius, who was now living in the Gaul dynasty, would face after Henry joined the Germanic dynasty. Death was considered a light punishment. Unfortunately, Henry was a little late to adapt to the situation. If back then, Ouyang Shua sighed and did not continue. Previously, Ouyang Shua had also thought of roping Henry from the Silver Hand's camp to become a great help. If that was really the case, the situation in Europe would not be as complicated as it was today. At present, Henry finally gave up his so-called principles, gave up his fear of the Silver Hand, and joined the opponent's camp at the moment of life and death. How much capital could he gain? In the future Germanic dynasty, Henry might not have much room to play. So, who are they putting on this show for? Ouyang Shua's gaze seemed to be able to penetrate time and space and see the thrilling show that was playing on the European continent thousands of miles away. Seeing that His Majesty was in high spirits, the Black Snake replied, "It should be to plot against the Gangder army and the Spanish army that are still in the Gaul dynasty. Originally, It was not appropriate for the Black Snake to speak about such a military and national matter. Not all of them. Ouyang Shua shook his head and did not continue. What should be noted was that Ouyang Shua was still very well behaved. He would never wantonly discuss the Empire's military operations in Europe in front of the Black Snake. Gathering information was the Black Snake's duty. Based on Ouyang Shua's understanding of Henry and Manstein, they had racked their brains to put on this big show together. Their appetite was not limited to nibbling away at the little army in the Gaul dynasty. Perhaps they had even greater ambitions. Think about it, after annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty would be completely connected, and they would become the most powerful dynasty in Europe in one fell swoop, enough to compete with the remaining three dynasties. The danger of the Germanic dynasty's destruction had been eliminated at this time. Then, with the appetite and ambition of the Azure emblem, would they still be satisfied with the status quo? Absolutely not. Continuing to expand in Europe, and even unifying the entire European continent, was probably already on the agenda of the Azure emblem. If they could operate the entire European continent as their base camp, then it would be a beautiful turnaround for the Azure emblem. The position of the Azure emblem in the game world would become very solid. It's time to carry out the steel forging plan. Any delay will lead to changes. The information brought by the Black Snake gave Ouyang Shua a sense of urgency. He realized that if he did not take action before the situation in Europe became clear, Great Xia would not be able to get a share of the pie in Europe. Since you guys want to put on a show, don't blame me for taking chestnuts out of the fire. Ouyang Shua's gaze was distant. Chapter 1346. On the 12th of March, the Supreme Commander of the African Theater of Operations, the Logistics Support Center, the Phantom Army stationed in Africa, and the Atlantic Fleet received orders from the Imperial Court at the same time. Execute the steel forging plan immediately. The following week, the African Theater of Operations began to operate secretly to make the final preparations for the implementation of the steel forging plan that had been formulated last year. At this time, there didn't seem to be any obvious changes on the European continent. The Germanic dynasty was still fighting fiercely with the Gaul army, and the war in Europe seemed to be in a stalemate, giving the Romanov dynasty an advantage. Ouyang Shua saw a different scene. Under the secret surveillance of the Black Snake Guards, he knew that the Germanic dynasty was quietly withdrawing from the front line in Gaul and moving north. The exchange of fire between the two sides was just an illusion. At this point, Manstein's goal was very obvious. He wanted to deal a fatal blow to the Romanov dynasty. Such a plan coincided with Great Xia's strategy. After receiving the intelligence, Ouyang Shua couldn't help but reveal a trace of joy. The Germanic dynasty had really sent a beautiful assist to Great Xia. In contrast, the Persian battlefield was much more intense. Under the overwhelming offensive of the Great Xia army, the Persian Empire's territory was gradually falling into enemy hands. The dividing line between the two sides was like a deadly red coastline that constantly advanced from the east to the west. The situation of the war was getting clearer. Ouyang Shua predicted that as long as the Great Xia army continued to exert pressure, the Persian king would be unable to hold on. If he didn't want to lose everything, it would be best for him to take the initiative to admit defeat. In that case, Ouyang Shua could still consider arranging an official position for him. It wouldn't do anyone any good if he persisted. After all, Ouyang Shua wasn't willing to destroy a country every time it was destroyed. If that was the case, it would be a laborious task and a considerable loss of national strength. Of course, if the Persian king surrendered, the Great Xia army wouldn't show any mercy. Ouyang Shua even instructed the front line to fight in the glory of the Great Xia army. Not only did they have to frighten the enemy, but they also had to instill fear in the hearts of the Persian people. They had to beat the enemy until they were in pain and afraid. Only in this way could the empire govern Persia in the future without any setback. Many times, some blood had to be shed. Otherwise, it wouldn't form a brand and people wouldn't remember. When necessary, Ouyang Shua could also shed blood. At the same time, the silver hand and azure emblem's public opinion finally reached its peak. This time, Ouyang Shua had to go even if he didn't want to. When it came to guiding public opinion, the two organizations were truly masters. If it wasn't for Ouyang Shua's original intention, and if it was someone else who wasn't willing, he might really be played to death just like this, sullenly becoming the scapegoat of the two organizations. March 20th. Seeing that there were only 2 months left until the deadline given by Gaia, Jack finally didn't want to drag things out any longer. He represented the Dawson dynasty in formally expressing their approval of the Grand Xia. At this point, the Great Xia dynasty had perfectly fulfilled the 3 requirements to become an imperial dynasty. Ouyang Shua didn't waste any time. He arrived at the main hall at 8 in the morning, opened his communication compass, and clicked on the application to become an imperial dynasty. As soon as he clicked on it, a series of system notifications flashed across the compass. System notification: detecting the requirements for the Grand Xia Empire to advance. Condition 1. Unify the Huaxia region. Fulfill the condition. Condition 2. Obtain the overlord status of the Asian region. Satisfy the requirements. Condition 3. Obtain the recognition of the entire world's dynasties. Fulfill the requirements. System notification: detection complete. The Grand Xia Empire has fulfilled the requirements to advance to a Grand Empire. Do you wish to advance? As soon as Ouyang Shua clicked on the confirmation button, a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. At the same time, a rainbow-colored ray of light as thick as a millstone rose from the Xia Palace. In an instant it shot into the sky. Following that, clusters of rainbow-colored auspicious clouds appeared in the sky, mixed with rays of rainbow-colored auspicious light. An auspicious sign descended from the sky. Interestingly, one of the rainbow-colored rays of light landed on the Persian battlefield. The great Xia army that was charging forward was bathed in the rainbow-colored auspicious lights. Their strength suddenly multiplied, and they were like heavenly soldiers and generals. They immediately defeated the Persian army. Seeing such a miracle, the Persian army was so frightened that they immediately surrendered. A ray of rainbow-colored light won a local battle for the Great Xia, and it became a legend on the battlefield. This small interlude tilted the battlefield in favor of the Great Xia, and it became the last straw that broke the Persian Empire's back. If nothing unexpected happened, the Persian king would soon surrender. Ouyang Shua's communication compass continued to pop up with system notifications. System notification: congratulations to the Great Xia for advancing to an imperial dynasty. The Great Xia dollar has automatically become the global currency, and it can be freely circulated within the borders of all dynasties. With that, the Great Xia dollar made another counterattack in the battle against the primordial Tao. If Jack knew that there were such benefits to advancing to an imperial dynasty, would he regret it so much that his intestines would turn green? This was a classic example of shooting oneself in the foot. System notification: congratulations to the Great Xia for advancing to an imperial dynasty. The global ports and markets of all dynasties will be freely opened to the Great Xia to acknowledge the Great Xia's position as the overlord. With these 2 points, Great Xia's dominant position in the global trade was basically guaranteed. Even the trade rules would be set by the Great Xia. This established the economic foundation of the Great Xia in the future, and it was basically in an invincible position. This was a pleasant surprise. Before this, no one knew that advancing to an imperial dynasty would have such benefit. Actually, it was understandable. After all, one of the prerequisites for advancing to an imperial dynasty was to obtain the recognition of all the dynasties in the world. Since that was the case, there would definitely be a series of tangible benefits. Otherwise, why would there be such a high difficulty requirement? If it wasn't for this freak accident, Ouyang Shuo wouldn't have the confidence to send the great Xia to the throne of an imperial dynasty so quickly. This was Ouyang Shuo's ultimate goal in the game world. Apart from this, there were also a series of benefits for advancing to an imperial dynasty. It could only be said that compared to a dynasty, an imperial dynasty indeed stood at the peak of the world. The significance was completely different, perhaps because it was too shocking, or perhaps because it was too symbolic. Gaia, who had already cancelled the system announcement, immediately made an exception and once again made a system announcement. World announcement. Congratulations to China's player Ouyang Shuo for successfully advancing the Great Xia dynasty to the Great Xia Imperial dynasty, becoming the first ruler in the world to ascend to the throne. Special reward. 10 Homo sapiens, as well as permanent S-rank authority, as a reward. Congratulations Ouyang Shuo. Congratulations to the Great Xia. As soon as the announcement was made, the entire world was in an uproar. The players of the entire world didn't expect that Ouyang Shuo would be so straightforward. Without any preparations, he immediately applied for a promotion as soon as the Dawson dynasty made their announcement. This surprise came a bit too suddenly. Logically speaking, since the Great Xia was the first and perhaps only imperial dynasty in the entire game world to become an imperial dynasty, the Great Xia should at least make some grand preparations and hold a grand promotion ceremony. Ouyang Shuo had his own ideas. Firstly, the Great Xia was currently at war with Persia, and they were secretly preparing for another huge battle. Holding a promotion ceremony now seemed a bit inappropriate. Secondly, the Great Xia had already held 2 promotions, so there was no need to hold another one. Furthermore, with the current atmosphere, it was far from being a festive occasion. If the Great Xia were to hold a grand celebration now, it would give people the feeling that a villain was intoxicated by his success. It was better to keep a low profile. In this way, Ouyang Shuo was able to advance directly without making any preparations. Of course, although there was no promotion ceremony, there was still a pleasant surprise. After Gaia made the announcement, Ouyang Shuo logged into the forums and posted a message. From now on, I accept Gaia's invitation to lead the Great Xia team to Planet Hope. The moment the news came out, the entire world was in an uproar. If it was said that the players were just surprised before, then this time they were truly pleasantly surprised. Ouyang Shuo's declaration meant that at the moment of humanity's survival, there was finally someone who stood up and was prepared to turn the tide, to win a chance of survival for humanity. The players' hearts that were hanging in suspense finally relaxed a little. Over the past few months, the Silver Hand and Azure Emblem's overwhelming publicity had made Ouyang Shuo's legendary deeds widely known. He was eulogized by the citizens of various countries. Rising from humble beginnings, devoting himself to inheriting the Chinese civilization and unifying China. One legendary event after another gave the players reason to believe that Ouyang Shuo and his team would create new miracles on Planet Hope. They would overcome difficulties and establish new unparalleled achievements. Ouyang Shuo's global prestige reached its peak. Back in the royal study, Ouyang Shuo still could not hide the excitement on his face. Ouyang Shuo was excited not because of the recognition of the players, nor was it because he was about to head to Planet Hope, but because of the reward that Gaia had just given him. He never dreamed that other than the 10 spots of Homo sapiens, Gaia would also reward him with a permanent S-class authority. This was a reward that could drive people crazy. After the disintegration of the Federation, there was not a single human with S-class authority. The highest was A-class. Even Ouyang Shuo had relied on the rich resources of Great Xia to materialize a batch of Homo sapiens. His achievement points had been reduced to 90 million points. He was still 10 million points away from the S-class requirement of 100 million points. If there were no accidents, Ouyang Shuo would be the first player to be promoted to S-class authority. The greater significance of Gaia's reward was that Ouyang Shuo no longer had any worries. In the future, no matter how he materialized or exchanged, even if he used up all his achievement points, he would still be able to maintain his S-class authority. It was equivalent to saying that there was no problem of demotion. This was too important for the upcoming expedition. With 90 million achievement points, Ouyang Shua could do many more things besides materializing another batch of Homo sapiens. This was probably Gaia's intention for this move. You're very thoughtful. Ouyang Shua looked up at the sky and thought to himself. It could be said that Gaia had already given Ouyang Shua the greatest help within the scope of her authority. What the future held depended on Ouyang Shua. Under Ouyang Shua's operation, the storm of Great Xia becoming an imperial dynasty quickly subsided. It did not cause too much of a stir. The focus of the world returned to the battlefield. On the 1st of April, Great Xia once again ignited global public opinion. Chapter 1347. The English Channel was a strait that separated the Gangder Empire from the European continent and connected the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. It was 560 kilometers long, 240 kilometers wide, and only 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. In reality, the two countries had built an undersea tunnel at the narrowest point, calling it the European Tunnel. Because the English Channel was part of the North Atlantic and connected to the continental sea in Europe, it had been a strategic hub since ancient times. Many military conflicts and naval battles had occurred here in history. Two of the Gangder Empire's royal fleet's formations were stationed here. For the royal fleet, guarding the English Channel was equivalent to guarding the Gangder Empire's maritime lifeline, allowing them to advance and retreat as they pleased in European affairs. Due to the changes in the European war situation, the Gangder Empire had recently withdrawn the troops left in the European battlefield, making it their top priority to defend their homeland. At this time, the royal fleet's patrol of the English Channel was even tighter. But accidents still happened. On the morning of the 1st of April, the Great Xia's Atlantic Fleet, which had been completely replaced with ironclads, launched a surprise attack on the English Channel, starting a major naval battle. This was the first confrontation between the Atlantic Fleet and the Royal Fleet. In terms of military strength, naval warfare, and navigation, the two fleets were evenly matched. The commander of the Gangder Empire's royal fleet was also the famous naval general Narsen. They were basically evenly matched. The Atlantic Fleet's strength lay in its weapons and equipment. After the upgrade, the Atlantic Fleet had formed a three-dimensional space combat system of ironclads, fighters, and magic-powered submarines, already vaguely resembling the aircraft carrier fleet of the future. In comparison, due to the limitation of resources and labor, half of the Gangder Empire's warships were still sailing battleships, and not all of them had been replaced with the more advanced ironclads. This was understandable. Even with Great Xia's full-blown industrial strength, it had taken them almost a year to upgrade the Pacific Fleet. The Gangder Empire's progress was already quite impressive. In terms of weapons and equipment, the Atlantic Fleet had an overwhelming advantage. This was also one of the reasons why the Gangder Empire's royal fleet did not make any statements after Great Xia regained control of the Mediterranean Sea. Because they did not have the confidence to intervene. The outcome of the naval battle was obvious. Faced with the Atlantic Fleet's surprise attack, although the Gangder Empire's royal fleet responded appropriately, and Narsen was also calm in commanding, they were still defeated after nearly 6 hours of fierce battle. The danger and excitement involved were not something that could be described with words. The defeat of the Royal Navy of Gangder was like a dazzling flare that swept across the night sky of Europe. It was bound to have an immeasurable impact on the situation in Europe, which was already surging with undercurrents. In fact, the repercussions were already brewing. That afternoon, under the cover of the Atlantic Fleet, Tsing Guoquan commanded the Spectre Army and landed on the coast of the Steel Tudor dynasty. The vanguard of the army was aimed at Castle Avik, the capital of the Steel Tudor dynasty. The 300,000-strong Spectre army was fatal to the Steelder Empire. Due to their weak population, the Gangder dynasty only had 400,000 soldiers at its peak. After the setback in Africa, the continuous depletion in the European battlefield, and the local resistance against the invasion of the Germanic dynasty, even though there were 2 conscriptions in the process, the real combat force was less than 250,000 people. As for the newly recruited soldiers, there was no need to mention them. What was even worse was that of the 250,000 soldiers of the Gangder dynasty, almost half, or 120,000 soldiers, were still on the battlefield in Europe, working on the European strategy of the Silver Hand. In other words, there were only a pitiful 130,000 soldiers left to defend the country. Even with the local garrison troops and the new soldiers, the total number of troops of the Gangder dynasty in the country could not reach 200,000. This was a very embarrassing number, and it completely exposed the Achilles heel of the Gangder dynasty. Although the 130,000 soldiers were well equipped and well trained, they could not encircle the invading Germanic army and deal with the invasion of the Great Xia army at the same time. A huge storm was sweeping toward the Gangder dynasty. The territory was small and there was no strategic depth. The population was declining, and the country was isolated overseas. In this game world, where there were no technical barriers, the Gangder dynasty could not even talk about replicating the glory of the Great Britain Empire in history. Whether or not they could keep their roots depended on the eyes of others. Otherwise, William would not have given up everything he had and supported the organization to attack the Germanic dynasty. Only by ensuring the peace of Europe could the Gangder dynasty be safe. Unfortunately, the weak Gangder dynasty could not control the situation of the war in Europe and could only sway with the wind. William probably did not know that the 120,000 soldiers he had left on the battlefield in Europe had already been secretly offered to the Germanic dynasty by Henry as a gift in the future. Sad. Under the investigation of the Black Snake Guards, the weakness of the Gangder dynasty was naturally unreservedly exposed in front of Ouyang Shua. This was how the Forging Steel plan was born. The Gangder dynasty was the best stepping stone for Great Xia to influence the European continent. If they could capture the Gangder dynasty, the significance to Great Xia was definitely not just that they would have an additional overseas territory, but that it would have a greater strategic significance. First, with the Gangder dynasty as a stepping stone, Great Xia could control the English Channel, and then the North Sea. In this way, the estuaries of the European dynasties would basically be controlled by Great Xia, and the Atlantic trade that they relied on for survival would be firmly locked by Great Xia without any room to move. Even the Dawson dynasty across the Atlantic Ocean would have to act according to Great Xia's wishes. The trade rules of the Atlantic Ocean would thus be rewritten and incorporated into Great Xia's code of conduct. Second, the Gangder dynasty could threaten the European continent at any time. Among the 5 continents, Great Xia's influence on the European continent was the weakest. With the Gangder dynasty, they could make up for this shortcoming and extend their tentacles into the 5 continents. The whole world was a game of chess. Ouyang Shua could not refuse such a temptation. The implementation of the steel forging plan had a major premise, and that was to not cause a backlash from the European dynasties. If the European dynasties opposed Great Xia's invasion of the Gangder dynasty together, then with the strength of the Ghost Army, it would be very difficult to conquer the Gangder dynasty in a short period of time. Even without the participation of the Germanic dynasty, if the 5 dynasties of the Silver Hand were still at their peak, Great Xia would not dare to attack the Gangder dynasty. That would incur public wrath. Right now, the Spanish dynasty had fallen, and the Gaul dynasty had betrayed them. This was the time when the Silver Hand was at its weakest on the European continent, and Great Xia had the opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. Any later would not do. If the Germanic dynasty was allowed to digest the Gaul dynasty and then launch a counterattack against the Romanov dynasty, Would the greatly strengthened Germanic dynasty allow Great Xia to conquer Gangder? Perhaps the Gangder dynasty had long been seen by Manstein as something in the bag. It was precisely because of this that Ouyang Shua praised the intelligence work of the Black Snake Guard. It was precisely this crucial intelligence that allowed Great Xia to choose the most suitable time to deliver the most fatal blow. The victory of the Battle of Gangder was mainly due to intelligence. April 2nd, the Gangder dynasty, Castle Avik. In the study of the kingdom, the atmosphere was frighteningly heavy. It was as though the air had solidified, and it was suffocating. William, the king of Gangder, had an ashen face. He sat on the chair like a log, not moving at all. This was the demeanor of a person who had fallen into a desperate situation. This proved that William had no way out at this moment. On the day that the royal fleet had been defeated, William had requested to convene a meeting of the 5 countries and request reinforcements from the organization. William knew what the situation was. The Gangder dynasty did not have the ability to face this crisis alone. What made William feel awkward was that aside from the Dawson dynasty, no one else was willing to lend a helping hand. The Dawson dynasty was separated by an ocean. Even if Jack really had the heart to send an army, by the time they arrived, it would be too late. It would be of no help at all. What made William even angrier was that when William proposed to withdraw the troops from the European continent, Henry firmly opposed it. He claimed that the European battlefield was in a critical period, and the troops could not be withdrawn at this time. My country is about to perish. Why should I care about the European battlefield? William, who had always considered himself a gentleman, cursed angrily in the meeting hall. Seeing this, Henry could only nod in agreement. But his eyes flashed, and it seemed that he did not mean what he said. In fact, after learning that the Great Xia had invaded the Gangder dynasty, Henry and Manstein were so angry that they wanted to curse. This pair of schemers had never thought that just as they were about to reap the fruits of their labor, such a change would occur. The invasion of the Great Xia had completely messed up their plans. Left with no choice, they could only speed up the pace of annexation. They would first take down the Gangder army and the Spanish army, and then talk about counterattacking the Romanov dynasty. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would lose everything. As for the Gangder dynasty, they could only let go and let the Great Xia take advantage of them. William's heart was completely cold. Early this morning, William tried to contact the commander of the European army and give the order to withdraw. What shocked William was that the communication compass did not connect. Clearly, something big had happened. Next, William tried to contact a few generals in the army, but without exception, he could not reach them. William did not give up and tried to contact Henry, but Henry directly blacklisted him. It's over. No matter how stupid William was, he knew that it had to be the Gaul dynasty. But he did not know that just last night, the Gaul army suddenly surrounded the Gangder army camp, and when the opponent was defenseless, they disarmed the 120,000 Gangder soldiers and turned them into prisoners of war. The Spanish army was also disarmed. The European continent was ushering in an unprecedented change, and in this upheaval, the Gangder dynasty played the role of the weak, the role of a sacrificial pawn. Brother, you have to pull yourself together. Seeing this, Annie's face lost its usual vigor and was full of worry. Pull myself together? A self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of William's mouth. It's already like this, how can I pull myself together? Let them be. William had already decided to admit defeat. Annie said anxiously, even if you can't win, you have to fight for the best result for the family. Don't let the Great Xia eat us up, not even leaving bones. Chapter 1348. What do you think we should do? William asked. Annie glanced at William and said carefully, I think you should admit defeat to Ouyang Shua in advance. William was silent, feeling very embarrassed. If we admit defeat now, we still have some bargaining power. Don't wait for the enemy to attack Castle Avik, then we will really be nothing. Although Annie could not bear to say it, she still had to make it clear. I heard that Great Xia treats lords who surrender very well. Even a sworn enemy like Xiongba can sit on the high position of Western protector. Brother, you are not worse than them. Fine. William let out a deep sigh. I admit defeat. For Gangder, for the family, perhaps this is the best ending. We don't have to be afraid anymore. Brother, you have to hold on. Annie was a little worried. Gangder's defeat seemed to have drained William's spirit, and he no longer had the will to fight. William waved his hand, unwilling to continue the conversation. Seeing this, Annie could only retreat. April of the 10th year of Gaia was a turbulent period of time for the European continent. First, Great Xia ambushed the Gangder dynasty, followed by the news that the Gaul dynasty submitted to the Germanic dynasty, and at the same time, took the opportunity to incorporate the Spanish and Gangder armies. On the 7th of April, there was news that the Gangder dynasty surrendered to Great Xia. Shocking news came one after another, and in the blink of an eye, the previously war-torn European continent underwent a major reshuffle, forming a new power structure. Not only that, on the 10th of April, the Germanic dynasty, who had just annexed the Gaul dynasty, immediately launched a counterattack against the invading Romanov dynasty, determined to recover their lost land. The Romanov dynasty was known for its fierceness, so how could they give up the meat that was already in their mouth? Of course, Pushkin was not a reckless person. He had also tried to negotiate with the Germanic dynasty, wanting to use the current front line as the border, to redraw the border and coexist peacefully. How could King Manstein of the Germanic dynasty be willing? One must know that the Romanov dynasty occupied the most fertile land of the Germanic dynasty. Manstein threatened that the Romanov dynasty would only be willing to start peace talks if the Romanov dynasty returned all their territory. Such harsh conditions were also unacceptable to Pushkin. First, Pushkin was reluctant to do so. More importantly, once the Romanov dynasty retreated to their original borders, with the current strength of the Germanic dynasty, after recuperating, it was very likely that they would counterattack the Romanov dynasty. Pushkin valued the strategic security of St. Petersburg more than anything else. There was an irreconcilable conflict of interest between the two dynasties. Since they couldn't come to an agreement, they could only resolve it through war. On the other hand, the Caesar dynasty on the other side saw that the Gaul dynasty had surrendered to the enemy, the Gangder dynasty had been destroyed, and the Spanish dynasty had been destroyed. The Silver Hand's influence on the European continent had been cut off. With the destruction of the two dynasties, the strength of the Silver Hand in the world had also suffered a heavy setback. If the Persian Empire, which was in danger, was included, the Silver Hand had been reduced from 10 to 4 at its peak. Seeing that the situation was not good, Caesar withdrew his troops from the front line and stationed them at the border. From the looks of it, Caesar was not going to participate in the battle for the time being. He wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. He would place his bet on whichever side won. With the incident with the Gaul dynasty, Caesar didn't feel any pressure. Seeing that Caesar was so cowardly and didn't want to share the pressure for the Romanov dynasty, Pushkin was immediately enraged. He publicly accused Caesar of being a cowardly, selfish villain who had betrayed the organization. How could Caesar be so easily bullied? He immediately retaliated. The war of words between the two gradually spread from internal to public, and a big farce played out. In reality, the power of the Silver Hand in Europe had already fallen apart and could no longer form a united force. This made Jack, who was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, extremely pained, but he couldn't do anything. Jack also had his own problems. After annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty began to integrate the territories of the other dynasties in West Africa. They expelled the army of the Caesar dynasty and brought the whole of West Africa under the rule of the Germanic dynasty. In this way, The Germanic dynasty could unite with the Bantu dynasty in the south and form a pincer attack on the Central African region that was under the control of the Dawson dynasty. From the looks of it, the Azure Badge was prepared to drive the Dawson dynasty out of the African continent. Presumably, after stabilizing the situation in Europe, the Azure Badge's ambitions would also expand. They would no longer be satisfied with a nest on the European continent, and they wanted to conquer a new world in Africa. If they really conquered Central Africa, then they would be able to contend with the Great Xia's African protectorate. This was what Ouyang Shua didn't want to see. In this way, the African continent, which had been peaceful for a long time, was bound to become a new battlefield for the three major forces. But the situation of this struggle would not be limited to the open war, but more in the dark. The flames of war in Africa would most likely not be extinguished in a short period of time. April 15, Jingshi. The Silver Hand suffered a heavy setback and was on the verge of disintegration, which made Ouyang Shua's mood very good. At the same time, the rise of the Azure Badge in adversity also made Ouyang Shua raise his vigilance. The global situation was far from the moment when it would be completely clear. What made Ouyang Shua feel gratified was that the Gaul dynasty's submission to the Germanic dynasty showed that in the face of survival, the restraint of the two major organizations on their members was not as strong as he had imagined. Everything was still based on strength. This provided the foundation for the Great Xia to completely eliminate the two major organizations in the future. This morning, the imperial court's plan to deal with the Gangder dynasty had been completely released and was waiting to be promulgated and implemented. The imperial court decided to establish the entire territory of the Gangder dynasty as Gangder province and appointed the former governor of the capital, as well as the veteran governor of the empire, Wang Shoren, as the governor of Gangder to guard this strategic point for the empire. Given that Gangder province was isolated overseas, it was not easy for the imperial court to manage it. The imperial court also decided to establish the Gangder Judici office above the Gangder governor's office and below the imperial court to represent the imperial court in the military and political affairs of the Gangder region. The Judici office, under the authorization of the imperial court, exercised limited military and political power. The difference was that the Gangder province's administrative center was located in Castle Avik, while the Judici office was located in the former capital of England, the Fog City. This arrangement also weakened the Judici office's ability to interfere with the governor's office. The former king of Gangder, William, had been entrusted with the heavy responsibility of becoming the first Gangder Judici. This arrangement was both compensation for William's voluntary surrender and a way to appease the people of Gangder. It was not an easy task to make the people of Gangder, especially the proud Gangder players, suddenly accept the rule of the Eastern dynasty. It needed to be done step by step. If Ouyang Shua had not agreed to go to Planet Hope, the Gangder players would have already caused a ruckus. In addition to the internal arrangements, there were also military deployment. The Spectre Army, together with the surrendered Gangder troops, were reorganized into the Western European Army and temporarily placed under the jurisdiction of the Gangder Judici office. The remaining soldiers were not arranged to retire, but were temporarily placed in the reserves. The former commander of the Spectre Army, Tsing Guoquan, continued to be the commander of the Western European Army. William's sister, the former Gangder Princess Annie, was appointed as the commander of the Western European Army. In this way, the two most important people of the former Gangder dynasty were properly settled. After taking over the Gangder dynasty, Great Xia sent an envoy to the Germanic dynasty, asking them to return the 120,000 Gangder troops that they had detained. The reason given by Great Xia was also very sufficient. Since the Gangder dynasty had surrendered to Great Xia, then Great Xia naturally had the obligation to safely bring home the soldiers that had been detained without reason. The deadline is 1 month. If they are not returned, we will meet on the battlefield. Ouyang Shua's tone was very unyielding. This was done to win over the hearts of the people of Gangdar. The people of Gangdar had fragile hearts, and had always played the role of the weak in Europe. The former king of Gangdar, William, had never been tough in front of the European dynasties, which made the people of Gangdar, especially the Gangdar players, very sullen. Now, as soon as Great Xia took over Gangdar, they put on a strong front and helped them vent their anger. Naturally, they could win over the hearts of the people and let them see the benefits of surrendering to Great Xia. Secondly, Ouyang Shua also wanted to take this opportunity to give the Germanic dynasty a good warning. Ouyang Shua vaguely realized that after annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty had become a little cocky. They faintly considered themselves to be the leader of Europe, and even their attitude towards Great Xia was not as respectful as before. This was something that Ouyang Shua would not allow. Ouyang Shua wanted to use this to wake the Germanic dynasty up and see who was the boss. He had reason to believe that the current Germanic dynasty definitely did not have the guts to fall out with Great Xia. Not to mention anything else, once Great Xia cut off the sea trade routes of the Germanic dynasty, it would be enough to make the Germanic dynasty suffer. Therefore, the Germanic dynasty would have to return the 120,000 Gangdar soldiers even if they did not want to. Ouyang Shua really wanted to see what kind of expression Manstein, who was currently flushed with success, would have after seeing the Great Xia's diplomatic mission. It would definitely be very interesting. After the Germanic dynasty returned the detained Gangdar soldiers, the global forces would have a new understanding of the situation in Europe, which would be very beneficial to Great Xia's hegemony. In addition to the army, the court also had arrangements for the Gangdar royal fleet. In the great naval battle with the Atlantic fleet, only 2 formations of the royal fleet were defeated. The other 3 formations were still cruising in the North Sea at that time and did not have time to participate in the battle. Otherwise, the result of the naval battle might have been different. After the surrender of the Gangdar dynasty, the royal fleet naturally faced the fate of reorganization. Ouyang Shua did not mistreat them. The edict reduced the Gangdar royal fleet into 2 formations, eliminated all sail battleships, and equipped all of them with ironclad warships. At the same time, the name of the fleet was changed to the Mediterranean Fleet. As the name suggested, the Mediterranean Fleet would be responsible for cruising in the Mediterranean Sea to reduce the burden of the Atlantic Fleet and make up for this shortcoming. The Mediterranean Fleet belonged to the African Theater of Operations. The former commander of the Royal Fleet, Nelson, was also a famous admiral in British history. He was appointed as the Admiral of the Mediterranean Fleet. This was considered making the best use of his talents. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.